going on, everybody? It's your boy Big Dave back with another episode, a special episode of Culture Dads Live. So today we're going to talk about I don't even know why we haven't done this episode. Mr. Mike, how many episodes of Culture Dads have we done?
This is number 60.
Number 60. We've done 60. Oh my goodness. Yeah, we've done 60 episodes of Culture Dads, and we have brought up Final Fantasy, which is what we're going to talk about today, multiple times. In many different episodes, we've brought up Final Fantasy, talked about it. Me and Mike are both big fans of the Final Fantasy series, and it's pretty cool because we're kind of different generations of Final Fantasy players, and we're going to talk about that kind of stuff. But that's what we're going to talk about today, because this is what we do here at Culture Dads. If you're not familiar, if you're new here, is we do deep dives into retro and pop culture and history and all kinds of stuff for folkish and dissident minds. So we're two based publishing dads, two dads that run indie publishing, underground publishing companies, and we come together with our knowledge and our experience to give you guys overviews and reviews and deep dives into this kind of stuff. But I'm very, very excited for this episode, and we're gonna get kind of into it. But before, Mr. Mike, how are we doing this morning?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. Doing very well. Actually, I've been looking forward to this episode for a long time. I think our second episode was on RPGs in general. So we did talk a fair bit about Final Fantasy and others. So I think that's why we didn't get around to it for this long. It's because we did actually we did a pretty good episode on the genre in general, but this series is obviously very, very key to that genre. It was one of the formative influences on it, and it's one of the best-selling, probably the best-selling RPG series of all time. So, I mean, needless to say, very influential. It's really left its stamp on role-playing games through the ages. And it's certainly left its stamp on me personally and my personal development, in my aesthetic development, even in my religious development, I would say. So it's an important part of my formation, my formative years. So yeah, it's a long time coming. It's a bit overdue. I'm glad we got around to it.
Yeah, and more than one way, right? Because you are very, very musically influenced by Nobuo Uematsu, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, very much so. He is. I still remember back in the day. We'll get into him as we go along, but I just remember back in the day listening to like that. I mean, that's what made the Final Fantasy series so good, is it was a total package, right? It was everything. It was the graphics, the stories, the music. It all just comes together as a perfect package. Very influential on me as a musician, for sure.
Excellent. Yeah. Final Fantasy as a, my big guys, right? You guys have heard me yak about it, a lot over and over and over. You guys know who my influences are: the Lovecrafts and the Howards and the Smiths of the world, the Poes of the world. However, I would be lying if I said that the Final Fantasy series, as how they tell stories, was not impactful on me, right? Final Fantasy was a really big deal to me, and we're going to get into that. We're going to get into our personal kind of experience with this game series, and I'd say that it's important because pop culture is important. Pop culture is important. It shapes the way people think. It influences people in many, many different ways. We're talking, me and Mike are two bass dudes that are in the mix here. And these games, video games, if you're under the age of 40 or maybe even 45, video games had a pretty important impact on your life. You played them. There's a lot of kids growing up now that are, they don't even they didn't grow up listening to bands. They grew up listening to video game soundtracks and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the cultural impact of video games is not to be scoffed at. It is the biggest medium in the world by far. It dwarfs film. It dwarfs literature. It crushes everything. So for us to ignore it and not be involved with it and not care about it, I think is a just monstrous misstep, a monstrously bad strategy. But let's get right into it. Before we can get into Final Fantasy, we have to do a quick little overview. And for you guys that are culture dads out there that tune into this podcast, you guys know I like to do my historical deep dives, but I'm going to try to keep it kind of succinct here. We're not going to do a big long one. But I think it's a good story. It's the story of creating Final Fantasy with these guys is in and of itself an interesting and inspiring story. So, and I'm going to forgive me if I butcher these names. I am terrible at Japanese and Asian names. So, I'm not, if I butcher them, I'm not, I respect these guys as creators and artists and everything. So if Uematsu, if you're tuning in, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. I mean,
he is. You know he's a culture dad.
Yeah, he's yeah. So pretty much Square, which was the software company, started out in Japan in the 1980s, and they started out making games for Japanese computers back in the 80s. And they started with quite a few titles that were a little bit narrative. They started out with some narrative stuff. However, they kind of changed a little bit over time as they were trying to find their way into the rapidly changing video game market. So the Japanese PC gaming scene of this period was only it was like kind of how it was in North America and in Europe and elsewhere. Was back in the 80s, some people had a computer, but the only people that were really into computers were people that knew about computers. So PC gaming was something that was, pretty niche. It wasn't like it is now. Most people weren't really into it yet. So this is what they did. So as the video game market was beginning to change and the console market began to start, right, Nintendo came out with the Famicom. Now, what was really popular video games at this time was arcade games, right? Your Galagas, your Pac-Mans, these types of games were really popular. And the Japanese were the bosses of this, right? They made now it started in, you can go back, you could listen to our I believe it was the Western RPG episode. I go into great lengths talking about the origins of the arcade game, and it did start in North America. However, the Japanese were very, very good at it. They invented lots and lots of characters and games that we now know, lots of genres that evolved into genres that we still play today. They did a very good job. But that's what was popular in Japan. The RPG was not a thing in Japan, really. And we're going to get to that. So in 1985, Square, which was a studio headed by a fella named Sakaguchi, right? Sakaguchi was kind of the head of this. He made games that did well, but they didn't really pop off. He did some racing games. He did a couple mystery games. He did some different side scroller action games and stuff like that, because this is what the publishing companies, the game publishing companies and Nintendo thought the people wanted. And it is what they wanted. They played the heck out of these. A lot of the early Famicom, which was the original NES, what we would understand in North America as NES, the Famicom was, which, by the way, Famicom means family computer, right? The Japanese are really big at mushing words together. Famicom, Pokemon, et cetera, et cetera. It's like a thing that they do. So the Famicom came out, and it was hot stuff. It was pretty hot stuff. So Square signed with Nintendo in 1985, one of 20 something game publishers. And the first game that they came out with for the Nintendo, for the Famicom, was called King's Knight. And King's Knight, Sakaguchi designed this game. He wanted to make a side scroller, but Sakaguchi was not really into modern settings. He liked fantasy. Fantasy was his shit, right? This guy, he loved Western fantasy. He was into it. Western. And as we go through, you guys are going to see these guys were directly informed and inspired by Western fantasy, Western gaming, Western art. They loved it, top to bottom. This is what informed them. And actually today, a lot of the older manga guys and the older Japanese creators from this time period really, really mourn that we don't make that kind of stuff anymore. We kind of have copied their stuff and we spit it back at them now, and they don't like it. They think it stinks. So they like looked up to us. They looked up to a lot of the artists and creators. They looked up to Dungeons and Dragons and the fantasy and sci-fi art of the 70s and 80s, and they looked up to the movies like Alien and Crawl and they loved these films, and they just loved our stuff, right? They ate it up. It inspired them, and they now mourn that we don't do that anymore, and instead we kind of make it. The West really just makes knockoff anime and doesn't really do it right. But so anyway, going back to Square. So during this time, they were making games, blah, 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 and there was another company, you guys are probably familiar with these guys, named Enix, right? Enix. And Enix was in the mix, in the trenches, making games among the publishers as well for Nintendo, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what Enix would do, which was a little bit different than what other publishers would do, is they would put out calls. And this is something that I guess manga does, right? Manga, they put out calls. They say, send us your comics, and if we like it, we'll publish it and we'll give you money. So this is what they do. They have contests. So they put up this contest, and they found these two guys. I can't remember their names, but they came up with two ideas. One of them was it was called Door, where the characters kind of go in and do, it's like sort of like a puzzle game, side scroller type thing. And the other guy came up with a tennis game. So they signed these two guys. One of them was a manga writer. He was in the Shonen Jump magazine, and the other one was just kind of like a whiz kid. He's very, very young. So they get together and they start cooking up ideas together. Well, Enix had the bright idea to send these two guys to Apple Fest, right? Apple Fest had nothing to do with Orchards. It was actually for the Macintosh computer, because at this time in the 80s, the mid 80s, the Apple II was king, right? Apple II was the king PC that people were using. It was the king gaming PC, all that, right? So they go to Apple Fest. And Enix sent them there with the hopes that they would see something new and fresh and original. And they were right. When they got there, they saw the two main, and you guys out there, you guys that are OG culture dads that have been playing games and stuff for a long, long time, especially the old RPGs, are going to be familiar with these two series. They saw Ultima and they saw Wizardry, right? These titles, these series have kind of faded a little bit recently. However, once upon a time, these were kings. These were trailblazers. These were without these two games, we wouldn't have video games today. They were so innovative and incredible. And to this day, go play Wizardry 8. Wizardry 8, which came out in the mid 2000s, is still a very playable, brilliant game. Ultima Online is still a very playable game. And even there's some of their earlier titles are still very playable. Wizardry 7. However, if you go back really far, you got to keep in mind these games were made, first designed in the late 70s. So they are pretty primitive, but they're cool to just bring up and play and give them a shot. So these games were on the Apple II, and the two fellas from Enix saw these games and were completely blown away with their complexity and just everything they had going on, right? North American RPGs at this time were far above complexity of anything you could see in Japan. This was next level stuff to them. They walked in, oh my God, and they saw this and they were really, really impressed by it. So these guys got together and created a game that later became Dragon Quest, right? Dragon Quest was the first JRPG as we know it today, right? And what they did was they saw what they do in the West, and being inspired by Western art, they're like, we got to get our top guy, our top fantasy guy on this to do concept art and to do covers and all that kind of stuff. So they picked up a guy, Akira Toriyama. You guys might be familiar with this guy because he is the artist that created Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. He did all of the art for Dragon Quest. So they came out with Dragon Quest, which, because for copyright reasons, they released it later, years later in America as Dragon Warrior. But Dragon Quest in Japan came out, and it was a horrible flop. It's months after release, it sold nothing. It was terrible, right? The Japanese did not understand RPGs, tabletop gaming. So in the West, before like Wizardry and Ultima came out, we had, people were playing tabletop RPGs. Tabletop gaming was a big thing in the West. That wasn't a thing in Japan. They played arcade games and they played, mahjong or whatever they play over there. Tabletop RPGs and tabletop strategy games and war games were not a thing that they did. So this thing Dragon Quest was sort of alien to them. So being the clever guy that he is and having the reach that he did, the one guy that worked on Dragon Quest that was in Shonen Jump magazine wrote a bunch of articles to the very large audience of Shonen Jump, explaining what RPGs are and how to play them and why they're good and where they come from. So you had all of these readers of this magazine go and pick it up. So it started out really bad, but because of that little marketing ploy they did, they ended up selling 1.5 million copies, and it did really, really well. So after this, Dragon Quest became this monolith, right? It became the top dog. It was outselling everything. It was outselling all of the old arcade ports, everything. So during this time at Square, Sakaguchi, the guy that runs Square, was fantasizing. Like he wanted to do an RPG, and his bosses at the company were like, no, we can't do that. Nobody's going to like that. That's no good, blah, 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 blah. So Dragon Quest comes out and he's like, look, we can do it. I told you guys we could do it. Around this time, also, the Famicom disk system came out that it used floppy disks. And what this did was it made games cheaper. The console itself was way more expensive, but it made the games cheaper, and it also added the ability to save games, which was not available on Famicom cartridges quite yet. So this allowed for long style of play, for RPGs to pop up. So what happened was Sakaguchi, who was working on a racing game at the time, I believe it was called Rad Racer, or what was it called in Japan? It was called Highway Star in Japan. He was on the sly putting this team together to make this RPG. And it was smart that he did that because Dragon Quest dropped. So he puts together this team of people. It's sort of this ragtag group of guys. This one guy, I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Ishii, right? This guy Ishii, he came into the interview for this job. He was an artist. He didn't have any sort of game making experience. And he almost got turned away because he showed up to the interview wearing a leather jacket, looking like a biker kind of, which, he looked alternative for conservative 1980s Japanese culture, which has a far stricter professional culture than even we do in the United States. So he pulls up like completely wearing this leather jacket, looking like a tough guy and all this kind of stuff. So he almost didn't hire him. He's like, what are you doing showing up here like this? He's like, look at my books. I want to show you what I work on. So he opens up this guy's sketchbooks and sees like really, really just this guy's brilliant. So he brings this Ishii guy onto the scene. And Ishii was completely enamored with Western fantasy art. He loved it. Guys like sci-fi art, guys like Hildebrand, Frank Frazetta period, those kinds of guys. But what Ishii did when he came onto the scene, onto the team, he looked at the games like Wizardry and Ultima in the West, and he wanted to come up with ways that he could chop off some of the fat so this thing could run on a Famicom. It wasn't a computer game, so it could run on the Famicom, but also switch up some stuff that he thought would improve the games. And this Ishii guy invented things that are in all games today. The world map. He invented a world map. He invented the side battle scheme, because all RPGs up until this, you had your blobbers and your first person view. And even the original Dragon Warrior game was first person view. So he created that, like the side view battle system. And also, this is a big one, and this is kind of a mundane one, but this is a big one. He created the start screen, the press start screen, the title card for games. And all games have a title card now. This guy invented it. So anyway, Ishii recommended, because they saw what Dragon Quest did with Akira Toriyama from Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Z wasn't out yet, but from Dragon Ball. And they're like, we need to get a guy like that. So they went around looking for somebody, and they find this guy named Yoshitaka Armano, right? Armano was a kind of an enigma. This guy was really kind of an eclectic, nutty guy. He's still around. This guy was just like an art genius. He refused to go to art school. He wanted to create his own style and learn, and he was an autodidact, completely taught himself everything. And this guy was so good at 15 years old, he went and worked at Tatsunoko Productions, which at this time was like the animation studio at 15 years old, teenager, young guy. And he went on to work on, like, for example, you guys will be familiar with Vampire Hunter D. This guy did Vampire Hunter D, right? So he comes on and he's like, we got to do some art that's like Frank Frazetta, right? He's like, we have to do stuff that's like Frank Frazetta, but for Japanese people, because, you know, that's Western style. We have to do it for Japan. So he came up with all of these different art designs and everything. He drew the cover, drew the manual. He came up with the concept art and everything. And they brought in this other guy, Yoshimura Ito or something like that. Ito, and he was kind of like a programmer. And he came up with the idea of the turn-based combat and says, he's like, this is like a Western kind of thing. He's like, I want to create combat that feels like an NFL game where you stop and start and have the strategy that goes into it. So he created the turn-based combat like we understand today in JRPGs. So months go by. Actually, this game was produced in 3-4 months. I can't remember exactly, but it was created only in a few months. And as right before it was supposed to come out, it was going to be called Fighting Fantasy, right? Fighting Fantasy. But that was already taken. And because they had their eyes on the Western market, there was a like series. I can't remember if it was an RPG, a tabletop RPG, it was a series of books or whatever. But there was something called Fighting Fantasy, and they were going to run into copyright issues if they ever cracked into North America. So they went with Final Fantasy, right? And this was kind of like tongue in cheek, sort of, because Sakaguchi was not doing good financially. The company was about to hit rock bottom. They were not as profitable as they needed to be. Sakaguchi was saying, this is my life. His whole dream was to make video games and to be successful making an RPG like they have in the West and bringing it to Japan. This was this guy's vision. It was his passion. It was his dream. And a lot of the other people said this guy was actually sort of tough to work with. He was a little bit of a tyrant. He was in everybody's stuff, overseeing everything. This guy was obsessed, completely obsessed, passionate. This guy was nuts about this. This was his last hurrah. And he said, if Final Fantasy doesn't work, if this game doesn't work, then he's going to go back to college and he's going to go work a desk job. He's done with video games. He quits, right? So it was called Final Fantasy because it was Sakaguchi's Final Fantasy. And also they liked it because it sounded cool. They thought it was catchy. And it was. So 1987, the first Final Fantasy game comes out. And to give you guys an idea of how much publishers were chasing the dragon of Dragon Quest. They were chasing the Dragon Quest, right? It was something like 17 titles came out within like a month of Dragon Quest or something, or within like 6 months. I can't remember exactly, but like tons of JRPGs started dropping, and none of them were like up to par, but they were still getting. It was like popular. So Final Fantasy finally drops in December of 1987, and it was like 2 weeks before another big series, Phantasy Stars. I'm sure people are familiar with Phantasy Star Online and the Phantasy Star series, which was a Sega game. But so anyway, Final Fantasy drops in 1987. Sakaguchi said, this is going to be a big hit. It's coming out. We need at least minimum 500,000 copies. Or that's it. We need that. He guaranteed it. So the guys that ran, he said 400,000 copies. So the guys that were running the company, like the CEOs and all that, were like, dude, we don't have the budget for that. This could fail. We failed. We're failing. We're about to die. Like we can't roll the dice on your vision, no matter how much you love it, et cetera, et cetera. So they're like, we're going to do 200,000 copies. Sakaguchi hated this. He was pissed. He was offended. So what he did, and this was like pretty fucked up, was Sakaguchi said, fuck you to you guys, those guys. And he went around showing Final Fantasy to other publishers. And he said, if you don't give me, if we don't get more copies, I'm going to take this to somebody else. And he did that. And instead of most of the time, if you did something like that, you would get fired, right? Instead of getting fired, Sakaguchi, they brought him into the office and they're like, you know what? We see how much you believe in this, and we believe it now too. You convinced us. We see your passion, and we're on it. Let's go over the cliff together. Let's ride the tiger together. So they went and ordered 400,000 copies, as he suggested, and this came out. It dropped, and it ended up selling 520,000 copies on its launch. Final Fantasy, the first Final Fantasy, was a massive success, incredibly received. They were writing they couldn't 5 out of 5 stars, 49 out of 50, 98 out of 100 ratings in every single magazine. It was a smash hit. They were rolling in the loot. They were crushing it. The great Dragon Quest that could not be toppled finally got knocked off by Final Fantasy. Everything from the music to the gameplay to the strategy to the graphics, everything about it, people were in love. People were hooked. So fast forward a little bit, Dragon Warrior goes to North America and it flops. Dragon Quest, aka Dragon Warrior, which was the monster of the industry, flopped in North America. And it was because in North America, we already had, we were on what, Wizardry 4 or 5, Ultima 4 or 5, 6, who knows? We were deep. You had Heroes of Might and Magic. We had all kinds of games that were far more complex than Dragon Warrior was. And plus, it was on console. And consoles at that time were kind of for kids. The Nintendo was for kids. Adults didn't really play that, right? I mean, some did, but it was for kids, right? For the Nintendo. So what happened with Dragon Warrior, and this is important because Dragon Warrior failed. They ended up having to give it away. So what they were doing was, with new subscriptions to Nintendo Power Magazine, they were giving away copies of Dragon Warrior, and that opened up the market a little bit. And eventually Final Fantasy came in and was a smash success in North America. It ended up selling like 1.5 million copies in North America. It was for the original NES, and it was awesome. It kind of paved the way for JRPGs. So that is the origin story of Square and how they came to be. Later, they bought Enix and merged and became Square Enix. So there's more to the story to it than that, but that's kind of like a quick overview of the origin of Square. But it's pretty much one passionate, crazy, obsessed guy putting all his cards on the table and saying, this is my last hurrah, assembling a team of crazy, creative, eclectic geniuses and just shooting for the moon. And it paid off. And look how big Final Fantasy ended up being today.
Yeah, it is quite an amazing story. It's a real rags to riches, a real Cinderella story kind of thing. And I mean, at the time, it's funny because, most of us don't get a chance to be involved in something that's that world changing, or at least that changing of an industry. But you got to think like what it must have been like for these guys at the time, sort of on the ground, like just working in this like little company that's like failing, and it's its last ditch sort of Hail Mary pass to save the company or whatever. It probably seemed pretty dire at the time, and it also probably seemed pretty like, mired in just day-to-day crap of, trying to get the release out the door, and like, artwork, and like things aren't working out. There's bugs and you got to fix them and all this stuff, right? That you don't think about that, with it, and it's sort of like mythic large scale like brush strokes that Dave just painted. This is the kind of thing that, we're involved in our little thing that we're doing right now. But anyway, that aside, it must have been quite something to be working with a team like Sakaguchi, Amano, and Uematsu, right? Like this, like the Beatles, or like Led Zeppelin, where like every one of those guys is a rock star, like of game development and design, artwork, music. It's like, you would struggle to put that team together today, even in an industry that's fully mature and very lucrative. You'd struggle to get that amount of talent into one room, like even today, kind of thing. So it's a real miracle that happened back then. But it is quite an amazing story, and I would recommend that guys, look into it. It's quite something. But yeah, my own personal experience with Final Fantasy, as I said, I mean, it's an important part of my own development. It's inseparable from my own character arc, my own becoming who I am sort of thing, right? For video games, like, that goes back a long way for me. I had the Commodore 64 back when it was like a going concern, and the NES maybe had like just dropped or something like that. But I mean, my family wasn't able to afford to get it right away or anything like that. So we had our Commodore 64, and I was content playing my Ghosts and Goblins. That was my favorite game back then for that system. It was good. It was really cool, actually. I mean, I moved around quite a lot as a kid, but then at one point I moved to this one street where it was like the first time where I really lived around a lot of other kids. And so I became really good friends with a lot of the guys there, and they're still friends of mine to this day. I used to go to my friend's house on this street, and he had the Sega Genesis, and he had this game called Altered Beast. And I used to just go and... Yeah, you remember that one? Did you have a Sega Genesis, Dave? Did you have one of those back in the day?
Yes, I did. Yep.
Yes, of course. Yes, I used to go over to his house, and I'd watch him play Altered Beast, and he'd be like, "Do you want to play?" And I'm like, "Nah, I don't want to play. I just want to watch. It's just so fucking cool." Like I didn't even care. Like to grab the controller and start playing or whatever. I just like being there, I like watching, I like just taking it all in, sort of thing. And yeah, this would have been, I'm going to say 1990 or something like that ish. I think Altered Beast came out in 88, but it was very early days anyway. And, at this time, this was like right around the time when the NES was really peaking. Mario 3 had just come out. There was that movie that was like The Wizard, starring the dude from the Wonder Years. That was like it, where Mario was an important like plot device in the actual movie or whatever. And so that was the game to have. That was the like, the one that was like selling the system, and every kid wanted a copy of Mario 3. I didn't even have a Nintendo at this point, but I had another friend where I'd go over to his house and I just watch him play Mario 3. So that was like every time I go over there, I was like, let's fire it up, But he also had this game called Dragon Warrior, and I think I like Dragon Warrior better. Like I was excited to go over there and play Mario 3 because it's the hot new game and everybody's talking about it and everything. But Dragon Warrior was like doing something for me that something that you never had, right? It's just like, giving you these the medieval flavor, right? And the music composer for the Dragon Quest series, Koichi Sugiyama. I get the names mixed up. I think that's it. But he is a genius in his own right, an actually like classically trained composer. And the music really, although that game was very simple, the soundtrack, each of the tracks was very, some of them might be like 2 measures long, 4 measures long, something like that. Like seriously elemental and simple for the time, but it was really doing something for me. And I also love the ye olde English text that they had. Mm-hmm. So needless to say, I was like, let's play Dragon Warrior, man. Like, where are you at with that? Right? Because the whole thing about Dragon Warrior is that it is a story. You don't just like pick it up and play it and then lay it down and then come back to it and then you start again. No, it's an actual narrative arc that goes from A to Z, and you have to like, you pick up where you left off, and there's shit to figure out, and you get stuck, and you don't know what to do, and you have to talk to everybody and everything like that. It's a very different dynamic than a Mario game. Love that. And then at some point, I got wind of this new game that had just come out. It was released in 1987 in Japan, but it wasn't until 1990 that this game came out in North America, and that was Final Fantasy. Mm-hmm. And this game really, I mean, I think by this time I had gotten the NES. This was a huge one. This was a really, really big game for me and my friends. I quickly got a copy of it. I think all my other buddies on the street had copies of it as well. And it was just an important bonding experience with the bros back in the day. You know what I mean? We'd be like talking about like, where are you at in the game and everything. And it's like, oh, I'm at the Mirage Tower. And it's like, how the fuck do I get through this thing? And it's like, oh, you got to do this and blah, 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 blah. Like back in the day, there was no internet, obviously. And it's kind of hard to like put yourself back in that space where you can't just go like Google something if you don't know what to do. You got to like, you've either got to have a subscription to Nintendo Power, which I did not, or you've got to know somebody who knows what to do, right? It's like very limited options, or you got to figure it out yourself. And that's, of course, what I had to do. That's what everybody has to do, basically. So yes, we were all Final Fantasy heads, and we used to have these like campouts. Like, we all lived on the same street and everything like that. So all the parents knew each other, all the kids knew each other. And we would have these little campouts where we go over to like one guy's house. We just like set up the tent and we just like fart around and do like little boy shit, all night kind of thing. Like shit. But it's like, yeah, it was just like ridiculous kind of stuff. And we'd also get the power cord running out to the tent, and we get like this little fucking like, I don't even know what technology they had back then, like a tube TV or something, like little tiny like cathode ray tube TV or whatever out there. And we'd have the NES, and we would play everything that we had. It's like everybody would just like bring over all his games, and we'd like have rounds of like Mario. We'd have, rounds of Mega Man. We'd have rounds of all these games. And even though it was like totally unbecoming of the, the format of like, one night in a tent sort of thing, we just like binge Final Fantasy. Wherever we were at in the game, it's like that's where we'd fire it up and we'd start it and play it. And it was such an important part of our childhood. It's just like such a bonding experience for these guys, right? And as I say, we're all still friends to this day. So that's what we were doing, and it just became a super important part of our social lives. And it wasn't just that. It wasn't just like the fun of the game and everything. It was like the aesthetic just became very, I don't know how to describe it. It was just like we all knew all the music for all of these games and everything like that. It just became part of who we were. Anyway, flash forward a couple of years, and we've been growing up a little bit, getting into our adolescent years, and then the Super Nintendo comes out, and you get stuff like Link to the Past, the Super Mario World, all the cool games that are coming out in the early stages of the Super Nintendo development cycle. And of course, one of the important ones that comes out is Final Fantasy II. I'll call it Final Fantasy IV. I'll go by the Japanese nomenclature for the numbers, just so it doesn't get confusing. But Final Fantasy IV comes out in 1992, and this is like a golden age. This is a golden age for a lot of things. It's a golden age for video games. The Super Nintendo was really, as far as I'm concerned, for its time, the Super Nintendo was the biggest quantum leap forward of any system. I mean, they could maybe argue that the PlayStation 1 holds that honor, but I really think it's the Super Nintendo. And it was a golden age for hip hop, right? It was a golden age for rock music. Like, think of how many classic albums came out in 1992. It's just crazy. Movies were getting amazing. I mean, they'd already been amazing throughout the entire 80s, but this was like, you had shit like Terminator 2 coming out. It's like, pop culture was really as good as it ever got at this point. And you got the Super Nintendo as well. Final Fantasy 2 comes out. And this is a flagship title for that game system. Now, I loved the first Final Fantasy. It was a huge, big deal for me. When Final Fantasy 2 came out, I had no idea that I could love a game as much as this. Final Fantasy 1, as good as it was, Final Fantasy 2 was just like, it was so huge for me. Again, I couldn't afford the system right away, but I was old enough now where I basically had like, I had like a little allowance. I could do little jobs for my parents and stuff like that. They were like, if you want to get this Nintendo, you're gonna have to buy it yourself. I'm like, fuck. All right. Well, okay. So over the course of like, half a year or something like that, I'm like scratching out like a living, mowing the lawn, doing like all kinds of chores and all kinds of stuff or whatever to save up that $100. And in Canada, even at this time, sales tax. So, I get the $100. It's like, you got to pay the tax. All right. Well, they're tacking a few more weeks. So saved it all up. Finally had enough to go down to the Consumers Distributing, which is this little forgotten chain. It doesn't exist anymore. Plop down my $1.15, my $115, and go get a Super Nintendo for myself. But of course, it comes with a controller. Doesn't come with any game. So I come home, I've got this like Super Nintendo system, no game, and my mom went out and rented me a copy of Link to the Past and Final Fantasy 2 until I could like afford to buy that shit. And I just binged it so hard, dude. Oh my god, it was just ridiculous. Just the opening of that game with like the music and the dramatic scenes and just like the storytelling. It's such a gut-wrenching story, a betrayal and all, and it's epic in its scope and everything like that. And the music, wow, we'll get into all of that stuff. But this game was so important for me. At this point, I was actually starting to really become a musician. I've been playing guitar for a fair while, a couple of years or something like that. But, I was about 12, 13 years old at this point. So, old enough now to really actually like learn how to play the guitar. And one of the things that I learned was a lot of the music from Final Fantasy. Transcribed all that shit by ear. Again, in 1992, there was no internet, so you couldn't just get tab. And nobody was printing any tabs. Like, you could go out and get Alice in Chains. You could get Metallica tab books. You couldn't get a Final Fantasy 2 tab book. That's for damn sure. So I had to transcribe all that shit by ear. Eventually, was able to arrange a fair bit of the music for the classical guitar. That's how much I was obsessed with it. It's like I'm sitting there for hours doing this stuff, just in love with the music. And getting into like band at school, like learning an instrument there and everything, and making my selection of what instrument to play on the basis of like what sounds the most like a Nobuo Uematsu soundtrack. It was huge for me. And then a few years later, in 1994, this is when Final Fantasy VI comes out in its North American localization, and it's a different game. It's a very different feel from Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy IV is very light. And by that I don't mean like trivial. I mean it's very vibrant colors. It's very daytime. It's very exoteric and all of that. It's just like that. And Final Fantasy VI is much darker. The story is darker. It's the color palette is different, and it was a different time for me as well. It was a much darker time in my life. You know, had to deal with some like personal tragedies, family tragedies, and everything like that. Final Fantasy VI comes out, and it's just exactly what I'm feeling at that point. And of course, it was a masterpiece too. As much as Final Fantasy IV did well, Final Fantasy VI, it took it that much further. It took it further in terms of the complexity of arrangements, further in terms of the complexity of the storytelling. I believe that the world was bigger. It was just a longer game and everything like that. It was a masterpiece, absolute masterpiece. And I absolutely love that one. And then, you know, fast forward yet a few more years later, and we get the PlayStation. It seemed at this point in time, like between the transition between the Super Nintendo and the PlayStation era, the 16-bit and the 64-bit era, or 32, whatever, it seemed like at one point, it seemed like Final Fantasy was just going to transition on to the, what was it, the Nintendo 64, I think was the next Nintendo generation system. But for various reasons, technical limitations of the cartridge format that the N64 had, Squaresoft decided to jump ship and go over to Sony for the PlayStation because they had the CD-ROM, and they were able to do more with that, what they wanted to do. So they moved over to the PlayStation, and they dropped Final Fantasy VII. I believe that came out in 1997. And for me, this was a little bit of a disappointment. I know that is going to sound weird to people, especially younger guys who kind of think that the old games are really clunky and don't hold up as well over time. But 7 had a very different feel. I mean, even Final Fantasy VI, which, like, it seemed like most of the games up until 6 were set in like an ancient time, like almost timeless, like mythical, in that it didn't really have a time, but it was just like generally ancient and like using all this mythology and everything like that. 6 was definitely like a steampunk setting. It was set in a time, and that time, although there was, of course, mythopoetic elements and mythic elements all throughout it, it seemed to be set in the late 19th century. There was something kind of concrete about that. And I loved that too, because I love that era. And there's something great about that aesthetic. Even though I'm not a huge like steampunk guy, I love the Victorian area. So I like that one as well. Final Fantasy VII comes out, and it's a diesel punk setting, which is something very different. For me anyways, it was something very different. And I thought it was amazing. I loved it. Like, I loved playing it, but I didn't like, it wasn't like life-changingly good the way that the other ones were. And something about that is probably more to do with me, where I was at, because I was like, you know, getting into my like later teens at this point, not as much like interested in video games, more like interested in being a musician and like doing other shit and everything. You know, kind of just like getting out of video games. It was just where I was at the time. So Final Fantasy VII, I don't think I ever actually finished that game. It never hooked me enough to like really propel me all the way through it. I did like it. The soundtrack is still amazing. It was a huge leap forward for its time, but there was something that just, it didn't grab me the way that the other ones had. Anyway, that's basically, and after that, I didn't even play 8, and I missed all the other ones basically after that. So I am of the generation of Final Fantasy players where my shit is the early stuff. And so, and we'll come back to this because I'm going to shut up in a second. When I came to Final Fantasies 2 and 3 and 5, the ones that were never localized until much, much later, I loved it. Even though I had never played these games before, I still loved them because they had the same flavor, and they were clearly like had the same spirit and everything like that. So anyway, that's my kind of long-winded experience with Final Fantasy. Dave, tell me about your experience.
Oh man. So I'm not the opposite, but I'm a few years younger than you are. So when I got my hands on the first Final Fantasy game, I was very young, right? I guess I was 5 or 6 or something like that. We got an NES. One of my cousins bought the new Nintendo that came out, right? Just dropped. In my family, obviously, we didn't really have the money to be buying, because those people don't remember.
Was that the Super Nintendo?
Super Nintendo, yeah.
Right.
A lot of people don't remember, but these games, these consoles and these games were very expensive when they came out. There were games that came out that were $80, back in 1991 or whatever, right?
That was big money.
That was big money. That's like the equivalent of a game today being $150 or something like that. So they were, they were twice as expensive as what they are today. The consoles were not cheap. They were, $300, $200. I can't remember exactly what the price points were, but they were not cheap. So we got our hands on the NES, and my cousin, who was, he was quite a bit older than me. He was a Gen Xer. He's my family. They pretty much, my mom and all of her brothers and sisters had kids. They got divorced, remarried, and had more kids. So you had these two generations of cousins, right? And one of my older generations of cousins, he was like in the military. He did very good for himself. He was like, in the Air Force, and he got into video games when he was in the Air Force, because I guess they have a lot of time, whatever. So he had NES, and he had all of these, like he had a whole like several shoe boxes full of games that he bought, right? So he gave me the NES and a whole bunch. It was like for my birthday or something like that. I was like, I guess I was 5 or 6 or something years old. And, you had all of the games on there. Well, I played Final Fantasy 1 and 2 on there, but being 5, 6 years old, I got into the first Final Fantasy a little bit more than the second one, because the first one has very little narrative. But it was still a little too difficult for me as a little kid, right? I could get to the first.
That game was hard as fuck, dude. It was
hard.
Every game for the Nintendo was hard. They were all unfairly difficult. Sorry, go on.
No, you're right. It was. I could get to here's a running theme in all of the Final Fantasy games. Like the first boss that you fight is the end boss, right? That's like something that's in all of the games almost. So I play this, and I could get to, what was his name? Garland was the first boss in Final Fantasy, and it took me like days to beat him. And I just got a little too frustrated. I was too young. I didn't really play it. And Final Fantasy 2 was even more difficult and complicated. So I was just a little too young for that. I played Dragon Warrior, and what were some of the other games that RPG specifically for the original NES? Dragon Quest, I think it was Dragon Warrior 3 was the one that I first played. There was a Might and Magic game. I guess Zelda doesn't really count. I wouldn't count Zelda as an RPG. I did play a lot of Castlevania early on.
There weren't actually a ton of RPGs for the NES. I mean, it's really the Final Fantasy 1, the Dragon Warrior series. I don't remember a lot of other ones. There was some like action RPGs, but not a lot of like pure RPG, like JRPG style.
Ultima, there were versions of Ultima and Wizardry on there.
Oh, was there? Okay.
Yeah, there was. Ultima 4, Ultima 3, Wizardry 2 and 3, I believe.
There were quite a few dungeon crawlers. I remember that.
One of them was Pool of Radiance, which is a Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition thing. But I didn't really, when I played the original Nintendo, I was playing, shooters and just like arcade style games, because that's what I could play. A 5, 6-year-old isn't going to understand a huge story narrative, but I would always go back to them because I loved fantasy. I've always been adored. I had Bard's Tale, if people remember Bard's Tale. So I had a big library of games, and I remember them, and I tried to play them, but they were a little bit too difficult for me. So a little bit later on, we get the SNES, and we got our hands on a Sega Genesis. Those you guys in Europe will remember it as Sega Mega Drive, right? So with these two systems, I get into Shadowrun. I get into, which I also played on the computer at that time. My dad had a friend at work that was a computer guy, and he would like hook us up with computer stuff. The first Star Ocean, Chrono Trigger, Xenogears. What else? Trying to remember, really jogging the noggin here. But all those games, right? Final Fantasy Tactics. So with the Super Nintendo, I get my hands on Final Fantasy IV. And Final Fantasy IV was actually a pretty big deal for me because it was the first RPG. So at this time, I'm also getting into games like Baldur's Gate, the first Baldur's Gate games, Icewind Dale. I was old enough to understand and develop strategies. I didn't really fall in love with Final Fantasy IV. I liked it. I liked the story and everything, but I thought it was a little too easy, a little too kiddie. I didn't, it wasn't as complex because at this time I'm getting into Dungeons and Dragons second edition. I'm like 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm getting into D&D second edition. I'm getting into, these more complex CRPGs. So Final Fantasy IV, at that time, I was like, this is kind of like for kids or whatever, even though it wasn't. Had a really great storyline. I really liked it, but I didn't really develop appreciation for these early Final Fantasy games until I went back and played them again as an adult. The first Final Fantasy game that I truly fell in love with was Final Fantasy VII, right? So Final Fantasy, the PlayStation comes out. It's got 3D graphics. It was popping, right? Final Fantasy came, and the PlayStation that we got, I can't remember if it came with a demo or it came with the full game, but we got a PlayStation. So this was the time where game stores were hot, right? There was a lot of independent mom and pop game stores. There was a really awesome one in my local area that opened up a stand at the flea market, and they were like, they started as one guy that had like a table spread of video games, and he would sell like retro video games and just like whatever, and he popped. And now they're like, they're struggling now in recent years. But up until recently, these guys were like the king game store in my area. And I remember I bought like NES games from this guy at the flea market when it was just him as a young man, right? He's there. His wife is holding his baby, and he's selling video games for cash on a table, like by himself. He has like a hand-drawn banner board that he made. I'm not going to say the name of the company because then you guys can people, scumbags out there can look them up or whatever. But that's how we got into games, right? Because we didn't really have where I grew up. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. We didn't really have. We had one mall, and it was a shitty mall, and it was 20 minutes away. And if you go there, they had one kind of rinky-dink game store. They had a pizza place. They had, just like. They had like a Foot Locker that nobody went to, and it was not really a good mall. It was a pretty lousy mall, and they had like a bunch of little mom and pop places and stuff in there. It wasn't your typical mall. It was, I guess, the people in my area didn't really understand the super shopping mall. They were used to flea markets, so the original version of this mall was sort of like an upscale flea market, right? So we would go to the flea markets, and this is also where I would get, it was actually looking back at these flea markets. These were actually really awesome cultural economic hubs. There were guys there that were selling tabletop games that they Xerox copied and put together with ring binders. There were guys that sold bootleg CDs and cassette tapes, vinyls, refurbished guitars, all kinds of stuff. I loved going there because everything that I liked was there. They had books, they had comics, they had freaking everything. All these awesome food vendors that sold like local stuff. It was dope. The flea markets back in the 90s and early 2000s and probably before were fucking dope. They were just a lot of fun. They sold all kinds of awesome cultural things, a lot of local stuff. I lost it now, but speaking of the Xerox table, I have this tabletop game. It was Xeroxed. Like the art in it is not. It's like it was two brothers made this game system. One guy like made all the art. He just like hand sketched everything. It was all black and white, copied, right? And the other guy typed it up. Some of the pages are a little bit crooked, and the text on it is crooked, and it's XYZ. But I loved it. So this is where I would get video games. But anyway, going back to Final Fantasy, we get this PlayStation. Final Fantasy VII. I can't remember if there's a demo. I got the full one, but I played it, And this game blew my mind. I absolutely fell in love with it. The narrative, the setting, it was, because I grew up on things like Heavy Metal Magazine and stuff like this. I love that gonzo weird mashup of sci-fi and fantasy and all this kind of stuff. And it had horror elements in it. It had Norse references in it. It had everything that I liked all mashed up into one. And it had a heroic story and like freedom fighters and all this kind of stuff. And I fell in love with it. I adored it. And to this day, it's the most played one that I have out of the entire series. I could probably do a whole episode by myself talking about Final Fantasy VII. I loved it. I loved the music, the soundtrack.
Maybe we will.
Yeah, maybe we should. Have you played Final Fantasy VII recently? Like
not recently. No, I haven't replayed it, but I would do that for that episode. It is a classic, absolutely.
The music in it, the graphics, which now if you go back and play it, they're a little blocky and weird, and they're not all. But graphically, this game was incredible, right? Because they did a lot of stuff that was never seen before. Final Fantasy is known for doing this, and it sort of led them in a bad direction, right? They took the Faustian deal, right? And they kind of screwed things up later on, and we're going to talk about that later on. But like the animated backdrops, the hand-drawn stuff, the atmosphere, the dystopian vibe. You had weird gene editing monstrosities. You had this villain Sephiroth, who's like who reminds me of like Necron from Fire and Ice. He's this he's just one of my favorite villains, and the storyline is so bizarre and weird, and there's a love story in it, but it's really I'm not somebody that gets into, I think my wife gets on me all the time because I'm a typical guy. I think a lot of times romance is gay and stuff, but the romance in the Final Fantasy games is like wholesome and beautiful. It's not raunchy. There's no like fuck scenes in it. Nobody's getting naked. In fact, I can't think of any of the Final Fantasy games I can think of when the love is like realized at the end. The most graphic thing you see is like a hug or a kiss. You know what I mean? Or they like embrace each other and there's like flower petals going around or something. There's nothing pornographic or nasty about it. It's wholesome.
It's super. Yeah, that's the word. It's wholesome. It is. And the soundtrack, like Uematsu's love themes, like especially in Final Fantasy IV, are just so heartbreaking and so good. Like it's genius. It's absolute genius. And that lends to the emotion of the whole thing and everything. Yeah, they do it very well. It's hard to do well, but the Final Fantasy series does it well.
And one thing I've always loved about the Final Fantasy games is they all have a very spiritual, you could say pagan element to them. Not only do they feature like blatant, like Odin is in the game. Like you can call upon Odin to come, Shiva is in the game, right? You could call upon them to come fight with you. Not only are like pagan deities and Indo-European deities in the game, in Final Fantasy VII especially, the Neo Midgard is the first thing. The first place, kind of the dark village you go to where you kind of realize everything is called Nibelheim, and there's mountains and stuff. There's the world serpent that you have to fight. Like it's all in there. You have so many different, and even in the other games, you have a lot of Greek and Roman and even Celtic influences. So they're very deeply spiritual. They have a lot of ideas of like I guess you could say. Like world souls and spiritualism involved and going to the afterlife and all of this kind of stuff. And it's woven in there and this kind of very ancient mystic religiosity is just woven into the game. And it's not like modern games where there's this fucking secularism where it's like, oh, is it real or is it not real? Oh, it was science the whole time or whatever.
It's like the Scooby-Dooification of everything. You know what I mean? Like,
fucking hate it. I hate it.
It's terrible. Yeah, it's terrible. There's actually a very common take on Final Fantasy that it's anti-religion and anti-theist. That is something I want to address, but I don't want to stop you in your flow. So continue on.
No, let's talk about it right now. Because
all right, let's do that.
For me, the Final Fantasy games were like spiritually affirming, right? There's a belief in the afterlife. There's you go there. There are ancient races that exist that are descended from deities. There are literal deities. There is soul stuff. There is spiritual, ethereal energies. There's magic. There are great giant monsters that rise from the sea, and everything is very eschatological, right?
Yeah.
Every single one of these games is about the end of the world and the doom and people trying to stop it, fulfilling fate. Fate is like in every single game, destiny, determinism. Like it's just like over and over and over again, these like very ancient religious themes. Anybody who says that it's anti-religious is retarded. I'm going to say that.
They just don't know what they're talking about. It actually comes back to this one video that like some guy like put up many years ago, and it just gets repeated basically. I went back and I watched it. Actually, I hadn't seen this thing in a long time, and I remember like watching it before, like when I don't know, probably around the time when it first came out or whatever, and I was like, nah, I don't agree with that. But I didn't really think too much about why. I was just like, I mean, ultimately, like the bottom line is that Final Fantasy was not subversive and anti-theist for me at all, because what it did was it introduced me to a lot of mythical themes. It introduced me to the names of the gods. It introduced me to all of this stuff. And maybe I shouldn't say introduced. I had already experienced it before growing up as a kid. We've talked about this in other episodes. I've talked about this, about how myths and legends have always been important for me. I was lucky enough that my parents like really read a lot of that to me when I was very young. But Final Fantasy came back when I needed that, when I was in my adolescence, when right around the time when disenchantment starts to creep in, and it affirmed all that stuff for me, right? With all the summons and everything. Anyway, this guy, he did this video, and it's annoying. I actually went back and watched it. I hated it so much. I didn't hate it as much back then, but he has that same like, you know, voice cadence of every atheist Dawkins nerd, right? And constant mention of organized religion. Anytime you hear somebody like kvetch about organized religion, you know you've got a real piece of work on your hands. I mean, the main, like, to give this guy his due and not to hack on him too much, what he's the main sort of like evidence that he attests here to say that Final Fantasy is anti-religion is he goes to his favorite game in the series, which is number 10, which I don't know much about at all. And there's something in there that he says is basically anti-religion. It's like there's a cult basically, and like the main bad guy is like the cult leader or whatever. But the one that I do know about a lot is Final Fantasy VI. And this is an important part of his thesis as well, where he basically points to the final battle with Kefka, where he was sent through the different tiers, and they're based sort of loosely on Dante's Inferno. Actually, they're based pretty well on Dante's Inferno, going through the different realms from Inferno up to Purgatory up to Paradise. And what he basically says is that Kefka sets himself up as a god, and because the party is there to kill him, it's like killing God, and therefore it's anti-theist. Dude, I mean, he missed the point pretty bad there.
That's a terrible take.
It is terrible, because what makes Kefka such an evil character is precisely that he sets himself up as a god. This is a well-worn mythological theme, and it's not just mythical. It's not just from the classical Greek and Roman and others. It's in the Christian, Christian theology as well. This is one of the things that Christians and pagans absolutely agree on, is that if you set yourself up in the place of the god, you're going to get knocked down. It's what they call hubris. This is the Greek term for it. And you see it all throughout classical mythology, right? With Prometheus setting himself up in the place of Zeus, stealing the fire, getting knocked the fuck back, and chained up to a rock and his liver pecked out every day for the rest of eternity. You see it with Tantalus. You see it with Niobe, Icarus, Arachne. The list goes on and on and on and on. If you put yourself in the place of the god, then the wrath of the universe, the wrath of the god, the wrath of the cosmos is going to come, and it's going to displace you. is going to cast you down. You could think also of Satan in the Christian mythology, Christian theology, right? Wanting to rule in heaven. This is something that, like, if you think that that Kefka is like genuinely meant to represent God, and that the defeat of Kefka is meant to represent the overthrow of religion, I don't think so. It's just when you've got a motif that's shared even between Christians and pagans, you've got something pro-religion here, right?
Yeah.
So this is kind of a stupid take. Kefka is structurally equivalent to Satan, not Yahweh. So I think the dude who did the video just hates Christianity. But anyway, I mean, he does attest other evidence, but it's mostly from like the games that are like Final Fantasy Legend, Final Fantasy Tactics. I mean, Tactics was a great game, but it's not really one of the central entries in the series, I would say. Mm-hmm. So it's really stretching it really bad to say that like Final Fantasy in general as a series is anti-religion. In Final Fantasy, the divine is always the source of power, right? Mm-hmm. When you get the summons are, I mean, there's like a Chocobo summon, but there's also Odin, there's Shiva, there's Indra, there's Bahamut, there's Asura. All of these things, I later realized. I later came to, when I was reading about like the Indo-Iranian mythology and the Asuras versus Ahura, it's like, where does that come from? That sounds really familiar. You know what I mean? It's these kind of things that like laying up these, what would you call it? It's almost like a memory castle sort of thing. So when you come upon it later, it fits into a framework kind of thing. It was very important for me in that way, right? So the summons are a source of power that comes from the divine. The items themselves they're imbued with a religious or mythological power. You've got like Excalibur, you've got the rune blade, you've got Thor's hammer, you got the Aegis shield and Masamune from Japanese. That's only Final Fantasy 1. If I was started listing off all the items from all the games, it would become a bloodbath. It's imbued from start to finish, from top to tail with religious mythology, even the plot elements, right? And the original Final Fantasy, although when it was localized for North America, it changes these things to clinics, but where you go to get healed and revive your party members were called churches, right? In Final Fantasy II, you've got Pandemonium, is just taken directly out of Milton's Paradise Lost. You got in Final Fantasy IV, you got the Tower of Bab-Il, which, I mean, that's obviously the Tower of Babel, right?
Yeah.
Cain in Final Fantasy II, who is the man who betrays his brother Cecil, right? Kefka and this whole thing about the Divine Comedy. You got Sephiroth, which is a Jewish mythology. You've got Midgard, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So if you think that Final Fantasy is anti-religion, you got to rethink that, bro. You just got it. Sorry.
And here's a spicy one, right? There are certain parties out there that view that. So for folks who don't know, Sephiroth is like a adaptation of the word Sephiroth, and Sephiroth in Kabbalah is like their version of the world tree, sorta, right?
That's like the divine emanations. Yeah.
Yeah. And Sephiroth is Sephiroth in the game is evil. So certain parties have labeled it as I don't know how much I want to say this on live, but certain parties are offended by this and see that it is some sort of deeply problematic thing, right? So this idea that but you know what? That being in there is like they're directly referencing. Who knows? I wouldn't even have known what that is unless I played Final Fantasy VII, right? Mm-hmm. So, also I'm like I'm into that kind of stuff. So I probably would have came across it anyways. But I learned about it from Final Fantasy. So this idea that Final Fantasy is anti-religion is just like the dumbest shit I've ever. I don't even know how he came up with that. How. you have to be a real fedora.
I'll tell you how he came up with it. It's clear if you go back and watch the video. It was clear to me anyway, rewatching it, that the guy just hates Christianity. He just does, and he's looking for reasons why it's problematic towards Christianity. That's all it is.
Our boy Reagan Lodge for $5. Thank you, Mr. Reagan, so much. Awesome artist, by the way. Go check him out. Sephiroth is cool, but Kefka is such an underrated villain. Apocalyptically narcissistic transvestite in clown makeup. Was Final Fantasy VI trying to warn us? I believe so.
I think so. Yeah. I've heard all of them do that. They all do it. Have you not heard this? Yeah.
What do you mean?
The transvestites. They just they all do the cackle. They all do it.
Yeah, the troon cackle.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, Kefka is definitely, now to say that, I would say that he's an underrated villain. I would say that, and we're going to talk about this when we get into ranking the Final Fantasy games, but Kefka and Final Fantasy VI are very underrated. They're very, very underrated. And I know that the Final Fantasy VI, the six stands out there are always advocating for it. In the moment that we talk about Final Fantasy series, they come out of the woodwork to shout about it, which is, it's justified because it is a very, very underrated game. It kind of came out, first of all, it was branded very weird in the United States. It was branded as Final Fantasy 3, and it's not Final Fantasy 3. It came out like on the tail end of the SNES era, right before PlayStation, and then it kind of got blown out by Final Fantasy VII, which was this 3D cinematic, saga, this grand saga. For folks that don't remember, Final Fantasy VII was impressive, visually impressive.
That was a big fucking deal, bro. It was like one of the things that sold the PlayStation. It was so big that it was like, you think of the PlayStation as being this like huge changing of the guard, and it was, but like part of the reason for that was this one game. You know what I mean? It was a real, if Final Fantasy hadn't moved over to the PlayStation, there's an argument to be made that like Sony would have like maybe not even, it wouldn't have been as dominant as it was, certainly, and it might not have even like continued. It was like that was such a important game for that console.
Yeah. Well, what was out during PlayStation, PS1? You had N64. You had was it the Dreamcast or the Saturn that was out?
Sega Saturn was the Sega one.
Sega Saturn. It had a lot of competition. It was not, and there were some other ones too. There was, what was it? Panasonic came out with.
There was like 3DO. There was the Jaguar. 3DO. There was even the like Sega Genesis had like a 32-bit upgrade piece of hardware. There was a lot of stuff at that point. It was like, if you're a big like video game history nerd, the transition between the 16-bit and the 32/64-bit era is a very, it is a really interesting one. There was a lot of sort of directions that things could have gone in if things had sort of like cut one way or another. But there was a lot of kind of cool pathways that just never really got followed.
Yeah. And then they had to do it. So Final Fantasy VII, like, put PS1 on the map. And then again, when the next generation came out, the 6th gen, I believe, 6 or 7 gen, 5th gen, I can't remember. But PS2 was beefing with GameCube and the original Xbox and the Dreamcast. So, and then PS2 was propped up by Final Fantasy X, right? So it's like Final Fantasy was like was what put PlayStation on the map. If it wasn't for Final Fantasy, PlayStation would have. I mean, it was still. I think it was still done good. Like they had like the most games. They had the biggest game library. They had a lot of. They were the first console. I don't know if they were the first or they were one of the early consoles that had online play. So they probably still would have been okay. But if it wasn't for Final Fantasy, definitely solidified them as really strong competitors. So. There's a lot of, when it comes to the interpretation of the Final Fantasy games, you go on YouTube, and I think a lot of these guys are either, I don't know if they're astroturfed or if I don't know how they get so many views or why they're so big, but you go to these big YouTube channels with these commentators and they just have the absolute worst takes on games. And we talked about this on our last episode where we talked about the Never-Ending Story, the movie. And just these guys are just like machines. They must be programmed to just crank out just absolute horribly just terrible dog shit takes, right? They're just programmed to create these. Final Fantasy, another one that comes up is this idea that how progressive they were because they're so ecological. And yes,
oh my god,
they are very critical of capitalism. But another thing that they're Luddite games. These games are Luddite games, which runs completely counter to progressivism. You can't separate technophilia from progressivism. Progressives want to build machines until the end of time, right? They think that technology is going to liberate us, and I sort of think that now too. But that's a completely different topic. But this idea that the Final Fantasy is promoting this liberal, progressive, technophilic utopia vision or whatever is just horse shit, right? Final Fantasy VI. What is the big warning of Final Fantasy VI? Magitech, right? That you can't combine the old world, the magic of the old world and the beliefs of the old world and the organic spiritual nature with technology, or you end up with monstrous results like Kefka, who's trying to become a god, right? He's a fucking transhumanist. The same thing with Final Fantasy VII. What is Shinra is building machines that suck the essence out of the world and is drying it up and killing it. And now Professor Hojo, who has created these transhumanist super soldier monstrosities, is trying to fucking do use this to like, I don't know. It's like, how is it that they're just shoehorning their crap onto this game? Dude, play the game and let the message of the game come out upon you, right? And it's not progressive. I guess you could say it's progressive in some way, but I don't even want to say that. You could say that it's anti-capitalist, and some of the messages of it could like be sympathetic to what those people believe. But just think that it, in its entirety, fits perfectly into their worldview is just fucking delusional.
Well, the thing about their worldview is that it's incoherent and stupid. So, of course, it's going to fit in some places, and it's going to completely not fit in others because the worldview doesn't even agree with itself. Capitalism is a progressive force. So if you're an anti-capitalist progressive, and by that I mean even like a Marxist, anyone who believes in linear history at all, and an anti-capitalist, I mean, pick one, right? Like those two things like do not fit together in any way at all. And yes, in the Final Fantasy games, environmentalism is a important part of so many of them. Like you could point to Final Fantasy V. We talked about 6 and 7. You could point to number 5 as well, where what is the plot device, the driving point of the plot in that? It's that you're supposed to say, again, throughout the whole series, or at least the early part, you're supposed to save the crystals, like the crystals of the elements. But what happens to the crystals of the elements in number 5? They all shatter, right? Every time you get to them, they shatter. Why? It's because people have been exploiting them and using them and sucking them dry, right? It's the disenchantment of the world. It's capitalism run amok. It's growth for the sake of growth. It's like this cancerous thing. And this is, this is very clear throughout that game. There's quite a very pronounced environmentalist streak. I mean, and even at the end of the game, it's like, who are you fighting? Who's like the ultimate final boss against whom you're fighting? It's like it's a tree, right? Like the final boss in Final Fantasy V is nature itself, which has been corrupted by like man's influence, sort of thing. So I think that there's a very clear element in that. And there's also an element that's anti-progressive. It's like counter-progressive. It's not even just like not progressive. It's a return. It's a restorationist element in these games, and that is the re-enchantment of the world. This is something that the Final Fantasy series itself does, and like to a larger extent, this is what fantasy does. But Final Fantasy does it very purposefully, and I think very well. It reintroduces magic into reality, and it doesn't just make it this sort of like science plus elves like kind of magic that you get in some of the more modern shit, right? Like the magical worldview permeates these games through and through, right? Like Final Fantasy is hardly alone in introducing magic into the world, but it does it so in a way that's true to the ancient myths. It uses the real names of the real gods. Magic is always a source of power. We're always fighting against the forces of secularization and instrumentalization, right? This goes back even to like the early installments in the series, right? And basically what you're doing in so many of these games is you're fighting against what Max Weber called disenchantment. Now, this is a word that we all understand. It's something that he introduced. It's a concept that has become mainstream since he wrote in the 19th century. But for Weber, disenchantment was not just modernization, although that's an important part of it. Disenchantment also existed in ancient times, right? There's like in the transition between, and this is something I've talked a lot about on my Substack with the axial stuff, between the magical and animistic elements, the magical animistic worldview, going from that to what are quote unquote traditional, theologies today, basically axial theologies, involves a disenchantment, a magicification of the world, right? The world is disenchanted by the separation of itself into the natural versus the supernatural. And the separation over time becomes sharper and sharper until eventually the world is completely demagikified, right? And all of that stuff is pushed off into what we call the supernatural, which is somehow has no like congress or connection with the natural. And the ultimate meaning and stakes of the world gets offloaded into this other realm. And when people discover that there is actually there's no other realm, it's just what we've got, we're living in it. But when they discover that there's no other realm that has all of the meaning, the ultimate meaning goes with it. So that's how secularization happens, basically. The rationalization and intellectualization of the world, the intellectualization of theology, this is what's driving the disenchantment. And Final Fantasy, there is not a hint of that anywhere. It's obviously not a theological treatise, but it really does bring back that magical worldview where the gods are not just abstract forces that act mechanically. They have will, right? You summon them and they come of their own will, sort of thing. Like all of these elements are repersonified basically in Final Fantasy, and it's refreshing and it's great, right? And what Weber was talking about with disenchantment is really the Protestant Reformation and capitalism, where it's basically the desacralization of property, it's the instrumentalization and intellectualization, rationality of theology that basically makes theology into just an immature science. And then of course science comes in like the progressive worldview says, well, we superseded that, so fuck that, it's going into the trash. The move from a world of magic to a world of technology is everywhere in Final Fantasy, especially in, as Dave mentioned, Final Fantasy VI. If you go into the lore of Final Fantasy VI, later on in the game, you get the backstory of the War of the Espers, right? Which was this like ancient war to banish magic from the world, because magic was this like force, and this is going to like start to hit close to home for nationalists. It was this force that had to be contained because it was too dangerous, and it had to be stymied and stuffed into a little box. But now it's coming out, and like it just cannot be tamped down. The embers are flaring back up in the modern world, and it's creating all of this chaos and war and everything like that. I mean, this is a story for our time, basically, right? So yeah. This like re-enchantment of the world, the idea that the pre-axial or the magical worldview cannot be banished, but it will eventually come back no matter what. This runs through a lot of the Final Fantasy series. Maybe not every game, but a lot of the most important games. So, again, going back to the like anti-religion take. There's no way, right? Everything in this series points towards a reenchantment of the world. And I think that's part of why I really loved it. I didn't know at the time, I couldn't articulate it, but this is a big part of why the video games, why Final Fantasy hit me and Mario didn't. It's because it's got these things, right? These deeper elements.
Yeah. And I want to say another thing that runs, two more things that run counter to progressivism is the secular technophile capitalist world, right? And just about every Final Fantasy game gets they push it to the edge of the cliff, and the old world comes back being wielded by survivors of ancient powerful races, i.e. Terra, who's an Esper, Eris, who is an ancient, and Luna in Final Fantasy X, and Princess Garnet. These are they're always women, right? Which goes into Mother Earth. In fact, the name Eris was a Japanese version of saying Earth. They actually said it's called Aerith. They're trying to say Earth in a kind of poetic way, give her the name. But because of the Japanese accent, the localization turned it to Eris because they can't really say the TH, right? But Aerith is a member of an ancient race. These are ancient races that come back to save the modern world from its own destruction and bring back it a more ancient way, right? That just completely it would be monstrous. And it was a monstrous idea to modern progressives to think something like that, to think that there are people that are whatever. They want to believe in modular humans. They think that all humans are just completely modular. You can change them and shape them however, their nature and their type and whatever. None of this matters, right? I actually recently got into a fucking argument online with a guy. I was we were talking about ADHD or whatever, and he's supposedly has ADHD, and I was yeah, it's just we call it. I was sometimes it's called the hunter brain type. And he's well, it's not actually helpful or useful to talk about brain types. And he puts it in quotes. And he's actually, what we're finding out, you're the typical lib-splain, over-explain. Yeah, actually, just over-explain, fucking just assume you're dumb. They're the grown-up in the room kind of fucking pretentiousness of these creatures. But he comes, it's not helpful or useful to think of brain types and blah, 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 blah. We found that human brains and human beings are more modular. He actually said that, modular. And I was all right, well, fucking, mod your ADHD then, right? He can't, right? And then he goes in all these different directions with his pill pull and apologetics and everything. But he knows that it's true, right? To assume that people have types, that people have nature, that races have nature and different abilities and different attributes and different skill sets or whatever, to assume that there is difference, inborn, determined, natural difference between human beings is monstrous to them, because they believe in individualism, and they have this, as Mike pointed out, this incompatible idea of they don't believe in anything metaphysical, but for some reason they also believe in essentialism, right? They believe that there's some sort of essence that is not biological. However, we are also meat machines that run on algorithms, right? It has absolutely no congruency. It's not compatible at all, right? So what else are we talking about? So this idea that in Final Fantasy, you have these ancient races of people that have these special powers that come back and save the modern world from destroying itself and bringing back ancient magic and all this kind of stuff is not in their favor at all. And another thing is every Final Fantasy game is about destiny, right? It's about destiny. It kind of foreshadows the ending in the beginning of every single game. By saying you the first boss ends up being the end boss that you have to fight at the very end, and fate is tied into it, right? The progressive does not believe in fate, right? That to understand that there is some sort of grand determining factor, some grand determining system in the cosmos.
And yet he believes in causal determinism too, though. So square that circle if you dare.
Yeah, it's completely monstrous, right, to them. So this idea that there were these forward thinking progressive games, and all this shit is just they're just like, once again, have no self-awareness and can't see anything and are just shoehorning because they're in a cult. It's a death cult, right? Yeah. So they must see their worldview and everything, and because they're universalists, right? And universalism, if there's a truth outside the universal truth, then therefore their truth gets blown to pieces. If their universal truth, and then they're like into all this relativism too, another incompatibility, right? They're very, I don't know, it's completely nutty.
I think, to be honest, I think that the relativism is something that was just sort of cynically taken on in order to advance multiculturalism, and that's it. And now they've dropped it like a hot potato. It does not comport at all with their worldview, particularism, relativism. That's why they never talk about that anymore, right? Like it was something that was like an artifact of the 60s through the 80s, basically, but not so much anymore. But yeah, these people it must be excruciating to be a progressive, to like have to hold these contradictory ideas in your head and getting all jiggy with it. And it's like, you can't figure out your ass from your elbow because the two things are, unable to be differentiated fundamentally. And like, yeah, it must be very uncomfortable for these people to even enjoy video games at all, or to enjoy RPGs or tabletop games. Like we talked about this on our tabletop game episode as well. Just the idea of a character class in general is kind of antithetical to their worldview, right? Because it means that you have inherent abilities. There are some things that you are good at, and there's some things you will never be good at. Some things you will never do as a black mage, or as a thief, or as a fighter, or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Your little choosies do not fucking matter. One little example here would be like in Final Fantasy III, which is the first game in the series to introduce the job system. I love this game, and I love that system. I think it's really cool. But one of the things about Final Fantasy III that is even different from V, which is its like spiritual successor with the job system, is that Final Fantasy III introduced this capacity stat, which is basically a kind of like, job system inertia, where you cannot actually change your job until you have like acquired enough capacity to do so. So you can't just like change your job the way that like progressives change their gender like every day or whatever it is. Like, on Monday you're a cis, on Tuesday you're trans, on Wednesday you're a dolphin or something. I don't know, but like they could change it like they change a cute little outfit. You can't do that in Final Fantasy III. It was actually something that they changed later, where it was like more easy to do that, although there was still sort of inertial elements. But I thought that was really cool. It's very realistic, that like if you are a white mage, you can't just like change over to being a dark knight immediately, kind of thing, right? Like even if you do change and you have the capacity to change, like it takes more capacity to change from like the white mage to the dark knight than it does from the white mage to the red mage or something like that, right? You can kind of change pretty easily between certain things, but you can't. It's not just a free-for-all. You can't just like do whatever the hell you want. There are restrictions, and it's actually the constraints of the system that make the whole thing interesting. This is the system itself, like what an RPG is fundamentally. If you take out the story, which is admittedly a huge thing, but if you take that out, what you have left at the end of the day is a rule system, a rule set, a system of formal logic. And this formal system is actually what makes the game interesting. It's why chess is interesting, but just moving shit around a board with no rules at all is not, right? It's interesting because it has rules and constraints. It's creativity within those constraints that makes it beautiful. And this is actually what makes Uematsu's compositions beautiful as well, especially early on. But these people hate anything to do with constraint. They hate anything to do with thrownness. You can't just switch at will. You have to use your capacity, and it can only be between similar classes. They hate this shit, right? And so it just inherently, the structural elements of the RPG itself, just like the tabletop game, are completely antithetical to their worldview. So you can understand why they get all screechy and autistic about these things, about like having their ideology, ensconced into like every little nook and cranny of this stuff. It's because if they don't, it just naturally sort of rejects it based on like the structural factors involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why the new Dungeons and Dragons stuff, they're like removing, like you could be a good orc, you can be a good goblin, and you can, do the, and race doesn't matter, and it doesn't, and it's like, how is it that a 6'5" orc has the same potential for strength as a halfling who's 3 feet tall? You know what I mean? It's like
them, right? It's that all over again.
Yeah, it's like, bro, like just like look. You know what I mean? I thought you guys were about empirical evidence and all that. Look, goofy. It doesn't even like they go so hard with it that it like defies physics, right? They like eventually they're gonna start saying
they hate empiricism. They hate that shit. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just saying if they're eventually gonna say that gravity is racist and stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, you know what they say. If nature is unjust, change nature. That is a real quote. That is a real quote from some feminist manifesto thing that gets like shared around as a meme. These people, they just defy. They defy description. They're just like, you know what? If reality isn't living up to my standards, then I'm just going to light myself on fire, and everyone else is just going to have to accommodate me. That's just how it works. This is the actual worldview. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Nuts. All right, Mr. Mike, we are on 1 hour and 45. You want to switch over and do our ranking? We're going to do a tier list, and we're going to have a little bit of an argument. We're going to have some spicy stuff going on. And
let's do it.
All of the Final Fantasy games. So
I was looking forward to this. Yeah.
Okay, let me see. Guys, forgive my computer. I'm running on a Linux machine. So, okay, here we go. I think we can you guys see that? Let me see if I can make this bigger. All right. So, we got our S tiers. Well, I guess it's S plus, S, A, B, C, and D. Why is there S plus? That's goofy. Let's just change that to S. Let's just delete that row, S, and let's add a row. Can we add a row? Add a row below and call it F.
What the fuck does S stand for?
Super based.
All right. We'll go with that. We'll go with that.
Come on. Let me change that. Okay. And then we'll delete this guy here. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry, guys. Delete row. Okay. So we got S, A, B, D, C. And let's make that a different color. Okay. So, wait, why is that F now? C. Boomer Tech Hours here. Let me see D, F. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's get started here. You got Final Fantasy. Was that Final Fantasy 1? Let's be unbiased and fair here. Final Fantasy 1.
All right, so Final Fantasy 1. Look, I give anything points for ambition. I think that like this is, I would rather a flawed record that like tries to really shoot for the stars and doesn't quite make it than like a really solid record that like that plays it safe. You know what I mean? So for my money, Final Fantasy 1 is a very flawed game. Look, I mean, the mechanics, half the spells don't work. That stupid, ineffective thing when you when you miss the guy on the screen, he's dead, but like the guy like tries to attack him anyway. It's like, oh, it's so frustrating. I mean, the game is clunky. It's buggy. It was probably rushed through development a little bit.
Mhm.
Could have used like an extra 6 months or something like that.
But it was the OG.
But it was the OG, and it was so innovative for its time. It is really hard to get your head around that because none of us really, like, you know, unless you're like in your 50s or something like that, you probably don't remember a lot of what came before. So that game, I think that game has got to be pretty highly ranked. And plus, like, it was pretty complete in and of itself. Like the storyline, although it wasn't like the most prominent element in the game, I think that the storyline is still pretty good, especially for its time. You get into some really crazy like plot elements towards the end. So I gotta say, you know, for my money, what are our rankings here? I gotta say that's gotta go minimum B, probably an A. I would say that's my ranking.
That's where I'm thinking too. It was the OG. It started it all, but stacked up against the other games, it's not as strong. Let's put Final Fantasy 1. I'm gonna have to go B. Final Fantasy 1. What do you think?
There's a case to be made either way. Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, it's going to be hard for me to rank any Final Fantasy game that I've played like below B. But
B
sure.
is the absolute lowest. We'll give it a B plus. It's B.
I had it ranked. I did my own personal ranking of the first 10 games. I had it as number 3 on my list. So
number 3 of all time.
Of all time. Yeah.
All right. Final Fantasy 2.
All right. I'll get your take on this.
So Final Fantasy 2, it had some things in it that were like way better. You start seeing the story formation, but a little bit of the mechanics were a mess. And it was functionally, it was not. It was an upgrade and a downgrade from Final Fantasy 1, in my opinion.
Yeah. Look, I mean, the for the first 6 games at least, there's a very clear development pattern. Final Fantasy 1 starts out. As I said before, the plot is important, but really what set the game apart was the mechanics. It's about the class system. It's about the party. It's about the turn-based system. It's about the magic, spell charges. That game is all about the mechanics. The second game in the series is the one where the plot starts to come to the forefront. I remember the plot of Final Fantasy II pretty well. I don't remember that much about 1. I don't remember a whole lot about 3. 3, when you get to 3, that one is all about the mechanics again, where it introduces the job system. But I forget a little bit about the story. You get to number 4, you've gone from the emphasis on mechanics back to the emphasis on the story. The story of Final Fantasy IV is epic. Then you get to 5, and we're back to the job system, emphasis on mechanics. Then we get back to 6, and we're back to the story again. So you get this like back and forth between plot and mechanics. Final Fantasy II was where the plot really started to sing. This is like, you got to think, this game came out in 1988 in Japan. The plot in that story for a game in 1988 is absolutely off the charts compared to anything else. Now, as well, what I said before about how I really like shit that's ambitious, that like really tries to do something cool, even if it flops a little bit, I will still give it points just for trying. You know what I mean? Final Fantasy II was a real flop when it came to the mechanics. I love the idea of the mechanics. I think that I believe it was done for another Square series, the Saga series later on. Basically, the idea of the mechanics in the Final Fantasy II game were not like traditional levels. It was just like whatever you did in battle, you got better at. And like incrementally over time, your character would just become whatever he does, kind of thing. That's a lot more realistic, and I think that's really cool. But it wasn't done right. It was buggy and shitty in the same way as the first game kind of was. So it kind of didn't work. The music in Final Fantasy II is absolutely awesome. There's just not enough of it. The soundtrack is like way shorter than like in Final Fantasy III. So it's a mixed bag. Dude, I don't know. I just want to rate all of these on as S. I'm sorry, I just do. I would say it's got to be Final Fantasy 2. I want it to be a B, but maybe it's a C. I don't know.
I would say, I liked it. I think it was it was very ambitious. But I'm going to do C. I think it's a C. I'm sorry.
All right.
I'm sorry. I know I'm like downgrading your but there can only be like one S and A or like a couple.
Yeah.
Okay, let's give it a B. Let's take it up to B.
All right, I'm happy now.
Okay. Final Fantasy 3. Where's 3 at? Because the real 3, not Final Fantasy 6, but Final Fantasy 3. Is that in here? There it is. So I didn't even like really Final Fantasy 3, the real one. I monkeyed with it on an emulator like years ago. I thought the visuals were a little weird. It was 3D graphics. I think I don't know if I was playing the right one, but I don't know.
I hated that remake. I love the NES version of this game. Look, I mean, my story with these games 2 and 3 and 5 to an extent are that I played the hell out of Final Fantasies 1, 4, and 6 like everybody else did back in the day, and I loved it. This was my shit. This is my thing. This is my era of Final Fantasy. And then I didn't play any of the Famicom versions until much, much later, not till I was in my 30s. I went back and I played these games on like emulators with like translated by just like dudes in the scene or whatever, like unprofessional translations, and I fucking loved it, man. I absolutely loved these games. I played the original like NES graphics and everything on the emulators, and it was like being transported back to 1990 or something like that. It's just
let's bump up the OG to A, I think.
Yeah, I think so. It's a classic. It's did so much. But anyway, going back to these guys, Final Fantasies 2 and 3, I just loved these games because it was like having a nostalgia for a game I had never played, because it was still the same flavor, still the same spirit. The musical compositions in these games are unbelievable. They're 8-bit, obviously, so they sound primitive to most people's ears. But the soundtrack in Final Fantasy 3 is unreal. It really rivals any other game in the series for the soundtrack specifically. It's got a huge soundtrack. It's actually bigger than 4. If you look at like the track listing, there's probably something like 40 or 50 tracks, whereas I think in 4 it's got like 30 tracks or something. And these tracks are so good. So I think that this game is actually really fucking cool. And it introduced the job system, which is a really important staple in Final Fantasy lore and Final Fantasy mechanics. Obviously, this comes back in 5, and I think it comes back later as well. And it never really kind of like left. It was always part of the series. And the job system, although I think 5 is a little more customizable and a little bit less like thrown than 3 is, there's just something. It was still pretty complete, and it was still done well. It certainly wasn't the like mechanical mess that the first 2 were. It was the first one that was pretty smooth. In all honesty, I gotta put 3 at least at a B. I think that this game, if I was to go back and just like, if I had 20 hours of just like, I don't have to do anything, I have to play a Final Fantasy game, probably it's going to be 3, because that's one of the ones that I haven't played the least, and I really liked it when I played it. So that's my take.
All right, so at least a B. You said I have not.
If you listen to me, none of these are gonna. There's good like C, D, and F are gonna be empty if you listen to me the whole time. So
okay, let's go to. So here's some games. Now we're getting into Final Fantasy 4. I did play Final Fantasy 4 the whole way through. I actually love this one. This is one with Cecil, and you have the Lunarians, the Moon People. Mm-hmm. I thought the story was awesome. It was a lot of fun. I thought this was one of the probably out of the 2D era. This is probably my second favorite one.
Yeah, as I said before, I made up a little list before we started. Final Fantasy IV is my number 1 ranking. This game is really important for me. It was important for the series. It was like the first game for a new console. Went back to the sort of Final Fantasy II style of being plot driven more than mechanics driven. The music is just off the charts. It was the not the like biggest, not the most tracks, not the widest soundtrack, but every single track in this game, it just like punches, it just hits emotional notes. It's so good. I could not live with myself putting it below an S. This game is so good.
I will agree. I think Final Fantasy IV goes in. I have not played have you played the After Years, the sequel?
I did play a little bit of that. Yeah. I didn't get too far with it, but I liked it. I thought it was pretty cool when I played through. Yeah.
So like a C, give it a C.
Yeah. I mean, it's not essential. It's hard to rank it even separately from 4. I mean, if you rank it on the content alone that's not in 4, it's just not essential. So it has to go pretty low, I guess. But like, if you rank it with like, as 4, together with 4, it's obviously, up top. But I would say like in terms of like, if you're going to play these games in the order that we rank them, that the After Years has to go pretty low. Probably a D, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree.
I don't think they're going to be any Fs, but not for me anyway. But yeah,
there's going to be some Fs later on. So Final Fantasy V. My take on Final Fantasy V, I thought I didn't finish it. I thought it was kind of gay. I didn't love it. I didn't love it.
Why is that? Tell me.
I don't know. I didn't like the art style. I didn't like really think the characters were that memorable. I didn't love it.
Yeah. So 5 was like the first one that I played like later on because, okay, obviously 1, 4, and 6 were like I played them at the time, loved them. But that was it. That was, and 7 as well. But Final Fantasy V, I obviously missed out on. And I played that a little bit later, but not that much later. I played it when it came out as Final Fantasy Origins on the PlayStation. Mm-hmm. It was re-released. I think it was released with 4 and 6. I can't remember. At least 6. But 5 was included in that. And now I had like downloaded this like emulator ROM version of it back when I was, back in the day. And I would like open it up. I'm like, yeah, sweet. Another Final Fantasy. And I open it up and it's in Japanese. Oh my God. I was so excited. No, total disappointment. So I got the Origins version and I played the shit out of it and I loved it. But I would say that trying to be as objective as possible, the story's pretty weak, even compared to some of the NES ones. There's some cool stuff in it. We talked about like the environmentalist aspect, but by far the like strongest element in Final Fantasy V is the job system. This is the one that did the job system the best. It's cool because it's, if you like that sort of thing, it's very customizable. You can mix and match abilities and everything. And, again, you don't get that thrownness that we kind of like as being what we are, nationalists, but it's pretty cool. It was definitely the one that did the mechanics. It was very clean. There wasn't very many, no bugs and shit, worked very well. But I would say it's purely ranking it as like, which one would I play first? It's got to go below a lot of them. I would say Final Fantasy V is going to be a B or a C.
Yeah, I would put it in C. Yeah, because I don't know. I just thought the art style was a step back. I didn't think it was as good. I thought that the sprites were kind of weird looking. The music was beautiful for it, but I don't know. I didn't love it. I didn't think it was nearly as good because I played it after I played Final Fantasy VI. So it was like, what the fuck is this? You know what I mean?
The impression that I got from it, like a little bit later on, is that like, although I loved it because it was like new to me, but like classic, it really did feel like it felt like they rushed it out a bit. It was not as long. There was not as much, like the soundtrack wasn't as extensive. The mechanics were really good, but yeah, it just kind of felt like not as lush as the two are around it, 4 and 6. So yeah, I would agree.
Final Fantasy 6 S.
Yeah, it's got to be. Yeah, of course.
Masterpiece. Perfect game.
Yeah.
So now we're getting into some territory that you're not too familiar with, Mr. Mike.
Yeah.
I have played at least a little bit of all of these others, except for, I don't know what a Realm Reborn is. I've never played that. I have not played, I guess one of these is a Final Fantasy 15 sequel or 15 sequel. I've never played that, but we're going to go with, here's my era, right? These are the ones that I like played the shit out of. 7S. Perfect game.
It has to go up there. It's not my personal favorite because of what I've mentioned earlier, but like just objectively speaking, it was a massive step forward for the series in terms of technical achievement. It kind of continued the plot-driven element of Final Fantasy VI. And I didn't like the setting as much as I liked all the other games and everything like that. And part of it is just down to pure subjectivity. I wasn't as jazzed about video games when this game came out as I was like when 4 came out. Like, yeah, if I was like 12 when this game came out, it might have been a different story. But it was a masterpiece. Absolutely, the soundtrack is fantastic. It really holds up over time, and people still love it for good reason.
So the next one, Final Fantasy VIII. This is a controversial one, right? Because it came in, it's not as good as 7. Came in, it was a total love story. They redid the mechanics for it, and they did some really ambitious things. It had like its own internal card game that was in there. It was really, really an ambitious, mechanically an ambitious game. It was so ambitious that I mean, if you could break it, right? Once you figured out the mechanics, this game could be just like, it was like a walk in the park. However, and there's some weird stuff too, like Renoa, the love interest in the game, was like her break limit attack was she would shoot her dog. It was like there's some really silly, dumb shit in there. But the storyline, despite some of the silliness and stupid shit, the storyline was beautiful. It had a very beautiful story. The setting was really unique. It had a lot of really beautiful, awesome things and a lot of really dumb shit. For that reason, people didn't love it as much as 7. I didn't love it as much as 7. But I think that it got beat up too much. I think that when you go back and play it and try to appreciate it for what it is actually a pretty awesome game. It is a wonderful storyline. The characters in it are very memorable. The music is fantastic. There's some scenes in there where like it's just completely pulls on heartstrings. And when I say shoot the dog, she would literally pick up her dog and the dog would like shoot out, and the dog was the projectile. It was fucking dumb. But some of the characters in it were pretty cool. The main character Squall was like, this is once you hit 7, Final Fantasy 7, you get into the angsty teenager save the world games. And I actually love those. I'm not gonna lie to you. I actually love it. I think they're great. Squall, the main character, is just an angsty, like torn up, doesn't know who he is guy who's kind of like a jerk off, and he comes out of his shell later on. Some of the characters in it are I think his name's Zell is like the second in command dude. He's outside of I think he's probably the best martial arts character outside of who was the one in Final Fantasy VI, the martial arts character. I can't remember his name.
6.
Yeah, he was like a martial arts guy. He would look like totally 80s. He had like the headband and the fucking whatever. But mechanically, he was like a really tough, like a really good character to have on your team. I don't know. I love it, but I recognize that it's not one of the best. So Final Fantasy VIII, I'm gonna give it it's either B or C.
I would put it as a C. I really did not like this game. I didn't play much of it or anything like that. The the thing I hated about it is I didn't like the visuals and I didn't like the the setting. It just didn't seem mythic enough to me. And the visuals is kind of like, it's something that really couldn't quite be helped, because in whatever this game came out in 1998 or 9 or something like that, like I just hated early 3D. I hated it. This is part of why I jumped off the bandwagon with the PS1, is because, when you're anything to do with people or like living creatures just looks uncanny to me. Like I've only just now, I would say in the last 2 or 3 years, would say that like CGI and 3D art has gotten to a point where like it actually looks attractive and like something that I want to look at, that just doesn't make me want to puke. It's taken that long for the medium to mature to my old guy tastes. So I didn't like the way the game looked, and that was basically enough for me. I didn't like the way it looked and the setting, so that was enough to turn me off. But yeah, I think there's other elements in it, like the fact that it was so much like a love story is kind of unique and kind of cool. Like I like the ambition in that. But yeah, it's kind of, I think, probably similar in some ways to 2, although not for the same reasons, in that it's like it's trying to do something different and cool, and it didn't quite make it. You know what I mean? I think that's where it sits in the series.
I don't know. It's just when I remember I first played it, I was like blown away by the visuals. I've never seen anything like that before. The summons were incredible. The storyline, dude, I just got sucked into this game. I remember I got it and I like sat and played it until it was the end, because I got it during the winter time. I think I got it for Christmas. It was a Christmas present or something. Yeah, I got it as a Christmas present. My parents found they got like a deal on a freaking like collector's edition version of it, right? Because it was a little bit of an old game when I got it, right? I think I was in 8th grade or whatever. So they found like the collector edition of it, and it came with like a statuette, not an action figure, but like a statuette of Squall, the main character. And I just thought it was dope, right? I just thought it was cool. I might have to bump it up to B.
Yeah, be my guest, man. No, that's all right. I think objectively it's not one of the better ones in the series, but
and the final boss fight is one of the most epic, hard boss fights in a game. I just thought it was intense. The music, it was really, really, I don't know, it's tough. I want to put it in B, but it might be in C. Shit. All right. I'm sorry. Final Fantasy.
These things might shuffle around as we go. Yeah. We'll, at the end of it, we'll list it all off. We'll like, for the guys that are listening, just audio, on the Gumroad, we'll list off what's in all the tiers, and they might shift around.
So next is Final Fantasy IX. I think this is one of the best games ever made. It's a fucking masterpiece. The storyline is, and I skipped it when it came out. I skipped it because I thought after 7 and 8, I was like, this is kiddie. Like, this is like, I skipped it because it looked like fucking anime to me. So I was like, I'm not fucking playing this. And then I recently played it for the first time like 6 years ago. And I was like, I was a retard. This game was a masterpiece. It was beautiful. The characters were memorable. It was just a wonderful game. And it was like playing one of the early ones again. It was like Final Fantasy IV vibes with a much grander story in 3D. And I fucking loved it. I thought it was a masterpiece.
Look, I mean, full disclosure for me, I have essentially not played any of the games. I mean, I played some of them, but not enough to be like, yeah, I played that game. And for any of these after 8 or after 7, that's from 8 on. So I can't really speak to the quality of the game, but I would say if I'm going to play any of the Final Fantasy games that I've never played before, this would be the first one that I would start with because of exactly what you said. It's kind of like a kiss off to the like classic era of the series. I think this is where they were like, we're going to do one more game that's like really got the spirit of like the early stuff, and then we're going to just do other stuff, go on. I would say this would be the one. This is probably the one that I would play. So I can't really rate it, but my gut feeling is that it would go at least at a B and maybe higher.
I'm going to put Final Fantasy IX at S. It's got to go S. It is such a good game. The characters, you got Zidane, who's kind of like this like rogue guy. You got Princess Garnet, who's Dagger, and they like they have a romance. And then you have I can't remember his name, the knight character, and he's just like unwavering duty to the princess. You have Vivi, the black mage, and he has this whole storyline of whether or not he's real, because it turns out that he's like an animated creature, and it's just so heartfelt and wholesome, and it's just a beautiful, wonderful game. The mechanics, Final Fantasy IX is like Final Fantasy battle mechanics perfected. It's not as customizable as some of the early ones, but it is fucking great. It is so great. It is I highly, highly, highly suggest, if you're going to play if you're like Mike and you're an OG Final Fantasy fan, if you're going to play any of the 3D era, 9 is the one you got to play. It's the one you got to play.
I might have to make time for that.
You got to give it a try. So Final Fantasy X. This was another big leap forward one. This was like, it had voice acting, although the voice acting gets made fun of now. This was the first one to have fully 3D environments. Final Fantasy X, it was the last turn-based one. They eliminate turn-based and they go to action. This is the last, in my opinion, the last true Final Fantasy game. This is one. It's much more mythic than 7, 6, 7, and 8 were. It has so the storyline of it is Nico in the chat saying I can't put 10 above 8. I'm about to put 10 above 8. So, I'm sorry, Nico. Sorry, bro. But the storyline is you have Titus. He's like an athlete. His dad was an athlete too that like became a hero. There's this like cosmic world destroying entity called Sin, and he can't be stopped, except at the end they stop him, but they sort of don't, because it's part of this grand cycle. You have the love interest her name's Yuna, and she's this priestess of this old order, and she's just lovely, right? Final Fantasy just is great at having these lovely female characters. I absolutely adore the female characters in Final Fantasy. I think that they're beautiful, and they're gentle, and they have
feminine.
destinies. They're feminine. I love them. And I don't know. The only problem I have with it is the main character, Titus, is sort of a retelling of Zidane from 9. And then I don't know. I want to put it in A because it is such a great game.
In A. Oh, okay. Yeah. I thought we were going to put another one in S.
No. There's no more S.
Yeah.
I don't know. A or B. It's either A or B.
What do we have in? I'm having trouble reading these now. What's in B again?
2 and 3.
Well, I don't know. I can't really speak to the quality of the game. I don't know. Hard to say. Are you going to rank 10 alongside the original? Really? I don't know. I don't know. I haven't played it, so it's just like from the actual like from the like what's the word? From how it's its reputation. I don't know. It just seems like I've heard very good things about it, but I just can't say that it's going to go above, or it's as good as like the original. You know?
1 second here.
Dave's got to pontificate on this one for a second here. But yeah, I'm gonna have to play some of these other games. This stream has completely whet my appetite for Final Fantasy.
All right, I guess we'll put Final Fantasy X in B. Whew, that hurts. So 10-2 was kind of trash. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it was like they were trying to play on the success of 10. I don't know. I didn't think it was kind of dumb. So we're going to put it in D. It was a spinoff. It was kind of trash. I don't know. I didn't love it. Final Fantasy 11. So Final Fantasy 11 was an MMORPG, and it was trying to compete with World of Warcraft and EverQuest of the time. It was console. It was you know, I don't know. Fuck you. Fucking MMO. Final Fantasy. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Yeah. I think this is 12. Is that 12? Let me see. What is the logo for 12? Okay. So I don't know if this 12 because it's so small. I can't see. I think it is, but we're going to pretend that it's 12.
All right.
So Final Fantasy 12, I skipped it because I got it. And when it came out, I was outraged that they got rid of turn-based combat. And I never finished it. I played it for a few minutes, saw they got rid of turn-based combat, turned it off, and never turned it back on. I was pissed, right? So this last week, I have gotten Final Fantasy 12 on an emulator, and I've been playing it. And I will have to say, it's actually pretty good. It's actually a good game. So the problem is the main character named Zane is just another rehash. It's like Zidane and Titus again. It's like he's like the same character as those two, but like not as cool. And or Vaughn. I can't remember his name. Vaughn, whatever. Some of the characters in it are really cool. The world is actually it's purely fantasy. It's like back to Final Fantasy 9. It's the combat system is actually not bad. It's actually pretty cool. It's like a stop and go, sort of like the Dragon Age games. I don't know. It's not as cool as the other ones, but it's not trash. It's a very good game, and the story is very, very good. I don't love it, but I like it. And I think that it gets unfairly beat up by guys like me that are grognards that hate everything. It's not turn-based. I think that this game is good. It's not great. We'll give it a C.
At least it's not an MMORPG.
Yeah, it's not terrible. So what's coming up here? 12, is this 13? What is that? What does that say? I think this is 13. I think this is 13 here. 13 fucking F trash. 13 had like it was just dumb. The combat sucked. The characters were gay. I hated it. So I can't even see what this says here. What is that? It's something too. I don't know. It's something too. I don't know what it is. We're gonna skip it.
Chuck it the F.
Realm Reborn. Yeah, fuck you, F. So Realm Reborn, I believe, is Final Fantasy 14 fixed. Like when Final Fantasy 14 was another MMO when it came out, it was a complete mess. I played it. I was like, fuck this. And I turned it off. And I just don't care that they fix it. Apparently, it's still going, and a lot of people really love it. I don't care if you love it. F. So Final Fantasy 15, just hideously terrible. It's like one of the worst ones. There's no turn-based combat. The story is about a boy band that look like they're like from the emo scene of 2000 and whatever. It's terrible. It's trash. F. Lightning Returns. F. 16. I've heard 16 is better than 15. I watched some of the cutscenes, and it looks like it's fantasy. I haven't played it. I'm not going to play it, but I'll give it a D because it just looks better. So some games of note: Final Fantasy Tactics, I would put it in A. Mm-hmm. There was another one that came out. It was, what was it? So you had Final Fantasy Tactics Advance 2. I would put Final Fantasy Tactics Advance on a B and 2 in a C. Crystal Chronicles, I never really played them. You had Adventure, and then you also had a Final Fantasy VII spin-off. What was that called? Guys in the chat, help me out. It was when you played as Zack. Somebody in the chat help me out. I can't remember what it's called. What was it? But that game, I would put that game in a B or C, because that game was actually pretty good. And you go back and you get to play Zack, and you see the origin story of Sephiroth and all this kind of Crisis Core. So I would put Crisis Core in a B or C. I liked it. I didn't love it. It was for the PSP. It was like the only good game for PSP. So I didn't love it, but I would give it a B or C because I liked a lot of it. It was a good game. Wasn't as good as the other ones, but it was good. I'm trying to think what other game. There was like a Dissida or whatever. I didn't play that. I don't know. I didn't play any of the other shit. I don't think, outside of Tactics.
You're doing a lot better than me, bro. I think, I haven't even played half of these games that are on the screen, much less the others. So I did play Tactics. Right. I really liked that one.
Yeah, Tactics was fantastic, but I wouldn't consider it a Final Fantasy game. It was its own thing.
Yeah, it's different mechanics for sure.
Yeah. Let me see if there's anybody upset in the chat about my choices. Oh, yeah, my boy Frostkaz. X2 was good. What the fuck? Oh, X2 was... I'm sorry. It wasn't that good, Frostkaz. I love you, brother. You're my boy, but not great. Not great. So that is our ranking there. So we've got... I'm going to read them off. F, we got Final Fantasy 11, Final Fantasy 13, whatever this is, 14, 15, Lightning Returns, which is Final Fantasy 13 2. I don't even know why they would make a sequel to that piece of shit, you know? And then there's also a remake. There's Final Fantasy 7 Remake, which came out. I'm not going to play it. I'm not playing a Final Fantasy 7 game that's not turn-based combat. I did watch the cutscene.
Did they fuck around with the like elements, the like battle mechanics? What the hell?
Yeah, it's like an action RPG now.
Oh,
I don't know.
Christ. They gotta fuck with everything, don't they? Can't just leave well enough alone.
And here's the deal with all of the new games. If you're playing for the story, just wait for it to be out on PC for a little bit and just watch all the cutscenes, and you pretty much just play the whole game. There's like no reason to really play the game. So I watched all the cutscenes for the Final Fantasy 7 Remake, and I actually liked it. I thought they did a good job. They added some things in. I actually liked that. I liked watching it as a movie over a few days or whatever. So I enjoyed that. I'm not playing it. I'm not playing. Final Fantasy 12 is as far as I'm going to reach without turn-based combat. Without turn-based combat, it's not Final Fantasy to me. I don't care. I'm not sorry. So that's the way it is. So S, we got Final Fantasy 4, 6, 7, and 9. A, we got the OG original. For B, we have 2, 3, and 10. C, we have 5, 8, and 12. 12 isn't as good as 8. We either got to bump up 8 or move down 12. I don't know. We need like a middle. We need like a C+. All right, we'll just leave it. D, you have 4 after years, 10, 2, and 16. And then F, you have all this other crap.
So what would you say is the worst in the series? I know you like 7 the best, but what is the one that we've listed here that sucks the hardest?
13.
Yeah?
13 is far and away the absolute worst Final Fantasy game. It probably one of the worst. I don't know. It was probably, I don't think I hate a game in a series more than that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for a series like Final Fantasy, if it's a disappointment, then that's really saying something,
Yeah. Like if there was one below F, there was like an F- or a Z, I would put Final Fantasy 13 in it beneath even the MMOs that I refuse to play.
It's like a black hole that's like sucking down all the entire rest of the list.
Yeah. So yeah, that is our ranking, and that is our take on Final Fantasy. We're coming up on 2.5 hours. This is a big one. If you guys have any super chats, send them in now. And in conclusion, Mike, what do you got to say in conclusion about this series of Final Fantasy?
Well, I mean, this is something maybe not like particular to video games or anything like that, but I would say that, sort of going back to what I said after you did the history of it, is that when you look back at the beginning of Square, and again, I would recommend that people go and actually like watch a little documentary on Squaresoft, where it came from and all of that stuff, is that it came out of basically humble beginnings, right? Great things very often have small beginnings. There's a very interesting anecdote that Maestro makes in one of his books where he talks about Greek tragedy, which we think of as being this elevated thing, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, all the way to Shakespeare, and even into the 20th century with some beautiful tragic drama, began as, and we only know this because of the etymology of the term tragedy, it meant goat song. That's what it started as. It started as a goat song. We're not quite sure what that means, but it doesn't sound like anything particularly elevated now, does it, right? But great things often have small beginnings. They often start out of just a few guys building something that they're passionate about, that they don't even know is going to succeed, but then it goes on to become this world-changing thing. This now, what is a billion-dollar franchise. Billions of dollars have been generated by Final Fantasy, and millions upon millions upon millions of kids have learned who Odin is, what Bahamut is, who Indra is, and what a rune is, and all of these wonderful things that have completely re-enchanted our world. Not completely, but they've put their little stamp on it, their little stone on the cairn of re-enchantment of the world. Final Fantasy has been unquestionably a positive thing in this world, and it started out from just a few guys that just had some talent and were dedicated. So, I think that's a wonderful success story, and it's very empowering for all of us.
So yeah, what can I say? Oh man, Final Fantasy. We talk about this. We talk about this a lot, right? That pop culture and the things that we create and the things that we partake in now are not meaningless. They're not. We're not. They're meaningful to us, right? And while they might not be as grandiose as some of the magnificent things that our ancestors created, what we're doing now matters to us. And those who come after us are going to like these things, and they're going to look at us. And I think that our ancestors would look at what we're creating now and what we're looking at now. Not all of it, right? Especially 2023. But the really great things that we've come up with in modernity, being, post 1800s or whatever, especially the stuff that we talk about a lot here on Culture Dads, which is the art and entertainment and pop culture from 1975 going to like 1995, which I consider to be a golden era in and of itself. So I think that they would see this stuff, these movies, these films that we love, these games that we love, and they would be proud of us, and they would like this stuff. And although Final Fantasy is not something from our culture, it's from Japanese culture. The Japanese approach it. Sakaguchi and Uematsu and all of these fellas that made these great Japanese guys, they approached our cultural elements with love and reverence, and they used it to inform their art. And they created a fusion of these things that have themes and archetypes and narratives that are familiar to us, that we can also share. So, love and respect and hails to those guys, those Japanese guys that created these beautiful games. It's almost like we gave them the gift of their inspiration, or at least some of it, with our culture, and they returned it back in a beautiful package, right? So it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. It's an awesome thing. that we've managed to inspire these geniuses from another culture to create something brilliant, and they've given us the gift back. So hails to them and blessings to them. And these games are just immortal. They're immortal pieces of art that people are going to be playing for many, many, many years to come, forever and ever, until, as long as there's video games, people are going to be going back and playing these games and being inspired by them and falling in love with the characters and falling in love with their sagas and them saving the world and seeing what heroes look like, even though they don't necessarily look 100% like the heroes that we depict. They're heroes nonetheless. And Final Fantasy just does a wonderful job at this. At least it used to. As you guys see, I'm not really crazy about the new games. I don't think they're as good, but the ones that came before it, in my opinion, are going to be around forever. And we need to video games. We have to. Here's the thing. I think that the conservatives out there, the cuck-servatives that piss and bitch and moan, video games are just for kids. What are you, a grown man playing video game? Are so out of touch, and that is just such a loser position that to ignore the biggest medium in the world by far, the greatest, the sharpest sword, the greatest weapon. Like, this thing is so colossal and so influential for our time. To ignore it is fucking abysmally retarded on such a low order that you can't even articulate how retarded it is. It is so dumb. You might as well just put the gun in your mouth. You know what I mean? You might as well just end it. What are you fucking doing? You know what I mean? The thing that all kids are doing, that everybody, half of the world, more than half of the world does this pastime. And to fucking you shouldn't play. It's just stupid. It's just stupid to me. So that's my take.
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't get why they would just leave that sword on the ground for their enemies to pick up. But they do. Yes, Final Fantasy, the series, is immortal, as Dave says. Even if it never recovers, and let's be honest, by this time probably it won't. We have the old games, we have the OG games, we have the ones that were brilliant, and it had a good run. We ranked as late as the 9th installment in the series as a perfect score. Imagine if the 9th Led Zeppelin album or the 9th Black Sabbath album was just as good as their best. That's pretty good. They had a good run. You got to hand it to these guys. So I would say, just in closing, that if you haven't played if you haven't played 2 or 3, get a hold of one of the decent remakes. I think you guys are going to like those ones. But yes, there's so many good games in this series. And shit, man, I'm so busy as it is with Imperium, but I don't know. I'm gonna have to make some time to play 9 now. Fuck. This Culture Dads thing is really turning me back into a video game guy, which is awesome, actually.
You know what? I get a lot of messages from our guys that tune into our show, and they're like, one guy reached out to me pretty recently. He said, I forgot that I loved all this stuff. He actually went back and watched Neverending Story with his kids, and he's like, I forgot how wonderful a movie that was. And he's been going back playing the games that we're talking about and listening to the music we talk about. So, shout out to all the dads out there. Blessings, you guys that are, coming back home to the stuff that you love and rediscovering wonderful things about the world and wonderful things that we've actually done and we've been influenced by. So we got one more super chat before we shut it down. Nico, what is ARS? I don't know what ARSs are.
We got 200 R's coming in.
We got 200 hard R's. So we got, apparently it's an Argentine peso. So he's an Argentinian. So thank you. Go. Thank you, Nico, for your 200 Argentinian pesos. Very generous. Thank you so much. Says, recently I've been studying Tolkien, I think he means, From what I've learned, Final Fantasies are mostly drama, not fantasy in the tradition of Tolkien. I think they're very good games, but not that good fantasy. I don't know, Bob. I don't know.
This opens a can of worms right at the end. I mean, what is the difference? What is fantasy? What is the essential element of fantasy? I mean, one thing to be said for the series is that the lore, apart from some minimal elements like chocobos and Sid and other things, it doesn't really carry over from one to the other, right? So, I mean, yes, you can have standalone fantasy like a single fantasy novel or whatever, but that's something interesting about the series is that the lore doesn't really continue from like one installment to the next.
And I would argue that Tolkien is not the template for fantasy. Tolkien is a much later arrival to the genre of fantasy. Right. He's a lot of people like to look at him like he's the king, top dog, because, the movies came out and people got really, loved Tolkien. Tolkien is magnificent. Right? I'm not beating up on Tolkien, but he is no Lord Dunsany and he's not Robert E. Howard. Those guys are those guys are the godfathers of fantasy, not Tolkien. Tolkien made something different. Tolkien made an epic. So I would probably, I don't know. It's like, you got to define what fantasy means to me, what it means to you here before I can formulate an argument. What the genre of fantasy implies mythopoeticism, it implies an epic tale, it implies heroic storytelling. It implies a world that is beyond ours, a world that is a fantasy. So I would argue that Final Fantasy fits very nicely within fantasy, right?
Would you say that fantasy is simply something that is where the setting is outside of our world, but isn't also not an extension of that world, as in sci-fi? Just from off the top of my head, I think that's how I would sort of classify fantasy. It's about the setting in some alternate world.
Yes. So, oh my God, we're going to be here another hour. So when you talk about fantasy proper as a genre, you have to kind of delineate that from fantasism. There is a difference between fantasism and fantasy proper. So, fantasy proper is a genre that we interpret as something that has magic. It's from an ancient world. It has mythopoetic themes, et cetera, et cetera. This is fantasy proper. Fantasism is the idea of something that exists. It's like something of weirdness, something that is a world, a setting that is beyond ours, that is not necessarily like ours. So within fantasism, you can certainly have sci-fi. Sci-fi can, unless you're talking about hard sci-fi, your traditional sci-fi is certainly fantasism, right? Cosmic horror is fantasism. Cyberpunk is fantasism. Like pretty much anything that is like a world that is unlike ours is fantasism. So Jack Vance would be a fantasist. Clark Ashton Smith is a fantasist. These guys that have settings that, although they might have high technology, are fantasists, but they are not necessarily making fantasy. Now, some people would argue with me because these aren't, and I'm not married to these definitions. I actually think that having these genre definitions isn't necessarily a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing to categorize things so much that you get all these rules. I think having more of a qualitative approach to fantasticals or weird storytelling is better. But if you are defining fantasy by something like Tolkien, it's pretty hard to say that Final Fantasy is not akin to Tolkien. It has a mythology, it has an origin story, it has a doom, it has heroes saving the world in a great epic, it has romance, Dude, Lord of the Rings is loaded with romance. Lord of the Rings is a romance. You just can't say that it's not a romance. So I don't know. I would have to hear Nico's definition. Let me see if he says anything in the chat real quick. Dave Martell says, fantasy in the tradition of Tolkien is basically mythology. It's about the gods, heroes, and nature. When Hercules does something, it has consequences that reach strength itself. I don't understand how Final Fantasy is outside of that definition. But he says, but in drama, when a character does something, it's not connected to metaphysics. It says nothing about you. Man, we're going to be here all day, Nico. We're going to be here all day.
This could be its own episode. We could do an episode on fantasy. Yeah, no, I think I would agree that that Final Fantasy does fit what I would define as fantasy. Look, I mean, another thing, and again, this is a whole other can of worms. We won't be able to go into it. Is that definitions at the end of the day are ostensive, and that means that they are not really rule based. They're not based on like you have this element or this element or that element or this like even this like group of elements. What it is the way that you define things at the end of the day. You put them into these buckets or these categories by like how they match up with other things. So if you want to define fantasy, you define it as it's what Tolkien was up to, or it's what Dunsany was up to, or it's what Howard, and so on and so forth. It's you point at examples. That's how you define things fundamentally. When you get down to like the metaphysics of the thing, that's how you define shit. And it's kind of hard to be like it has to have these elements or at least some of these elements or whatever. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to define it by like it has to look like this or that thing that we know is fantasy, I'd say Final Fantasy matches up with it pretty good. It certainly has dramatic elements. It does drama really, really well, especially like some of the games. Like 4 does it absolutely magnificently. 6 does it magnificently. But whether it's drama, I mean, drama is a sort of like it's a very broad category where you could like, you know, put Shakespeare in with, you know, something like, you know, Samuel Beckett or whatever. That's a broad category. Does Final Fantasy fit into the dramatic category? Well, I don't know. Could you stage Final Fantasy? It's hard to say. It definitely has dramatic elements. It does it really well. I would say it probably fits more with fantasy. It's aptly named.
So if your caveat is the tradition of Tolkienian fantasy, man, I would actually say that Final Fantasy fits closer with the Tolkienian tradition of fantasy than say true traditional fantasy, which predates Tolkien. I think Tolkien is
what we call high fantasy, right? Like,
yeah,
he kind of created his own genre. So it's really like, you know, if you're following the footsteps of Tolkien, you're in high fantasy. If you're kind of doing something that's a little bit more standalone or like one-off, that's, you know, maybe something more like the Gods of Pegana. That's probably like Dunsany is a little closer to Final Fantasy than Tolkien. I could see where the difference is coming from. There's a scope and a depth to Tolkien that is just not present in Final Fantasy and is not intended to be there. So I can see why we want to differentiate Tolkien in Final Fantasy, but it's really more of a difference of it's a difference of quantity and not a difference of quality.
Okay. Oh, man, this is gonna be for another show. We're gonna have to save this for another show because we're gonna be here a long time. Because Tolkienian fantasy as you're defining it, Nico, versus drama, as in theater, which I would call drama proper, not just drama or dramatics. And then also you got to throw in the ideas of romance. And when I say romance, I don't mean just falling in love. I mean romance. What's that?
Yeah, you're not talking about Fabio and shit like that.
No, Fabio's kind of based. I'm not gonna lie to you, you know, but I'm not just talking about Fabio romance novels for chicks. I'm talking about romance proper. So this is a big, okay. So we're going to, Nico, I promise we're going to do we'll talk more on this because we're coming up on 3 hours. We got to shut it down. Right. My house is waking up. My kids are being bad. My dog's barking. So I gotta get going here. But I appreciate the addition to the conversation. I appreciate all you guys. Blessings to all you guys. Thank you so much for the donations. And guys, like always, if you like this podcast, you like Culture Dads, the hottest dynamic duo in the game, go over to imperiumpress.org/podcast and go get signed up. We do Culture Dads every single week. And we actually have a Culture Dads YouTube channel. We're going to start doing KDADS play. We're going to play games and do more. We're going to do more with Culture Dads because it's really blowing up and folks are really enjoying it. So we want to give you guys more. So stay tuned for that. It's scrolling at the bottom, imperiumpress.org/podcast. Go buy books, Imperium Press books, support Imperium Press so they may grow and blossom into the institution that they were destined to be and save the Western canon from those scumbags that want to erase it. If you want to check out what I'm doing, speaking of fantasy, go over to thebizarrearchives.com and buy books. We're like sold out of everything almost. So if there's something in the store that you want, we don't got it, go over to Amazon and buy it from Amazon, and you'll get it over there.
And before we go, let's give a shout out to our God Emperor tier patron, Kazilkum Cruiser, who is very generous in his donations. We appreciate every single one of you guys, though, that has signed up to the Gumroad. You guys make this possible. You have no idea what kind of support this provides, both to Bizarchives and Imperium. It is really crucial to all of our operations. So thank you for that. Thank you, Kazilkum Cruiser, and thank you to all of the patrons.
Yeah. Hail, Mr. Cruiser, and hails and blessings to each one of you dads out there. And I'll see you guys next time here on Culture Dads, Age of Sword